OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
It's 7:30 on this Wednesday morning. This is OTB AM. Eoin and Will with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. Today, we're going to be looking ahead to the SuperBowl with Mike Carlson. We're going to be chatting to AFLW star Aileen Gilroy. We've got Neil Tracy's Tide 5 looking ahead to the Six Nations. And of course, we will be chatting about last night's hammering that Manchester United dished out in brutal style to Southampton. 9-0 was the full-time score if you're just waking up this morning. Daniel Harris will be with us in a little while to discuss that, so get your comments into him. You can comment on the YouTube stream or drop us a tweet at Off The Ball. Will O'Callaghan, you didn't make the mistake that some of us did by going to sleep at half-time. You stayed around and you watched Manchester United chew the carcass of their opponent.
Yeah, I couldn't avoid staying around for the second half of what was effectively backs and forward zone between Manchester United and Southampton. I think the thing that probably tempted me to stay up was the substitution at half-time, the double sub with Cavani coming off for Martial, and more interestingly, Luke Shaw coming off and Fred going over to the left side of their defence to give Donny van de Beek some time into his legs ahead of a couple of big games for United against Everton and West Ham. As you say, United put 5 past Southampton in that second half to equal the record they got against Ipswich back in the 95-96 season, and Southampton were terrible, and I would say probably worse and more ragged than they were when they were beaten 9-0 by Leicester back in 2019. And Ralph Hasenhüttl, who I'm sure we'll hear from in a few minutes, said it feels a lot worse because Southampton have been so much more impressive this year. They've put it up to all the big teams. They were coming into this game a little bit out of form, and obviously with a combination of injuries and players who've been away with COVID-19. The one thing they didn't want to happen last night on was to go down to 10 men after 81 seconds. So Jankovic's red card officially marked as the earliest red card in Premier League history, beating Gareth McCauley a few years ago for West Brom against Manchester City. 4 seconds inside that record. It left Southampton with an uphill task. After that, they kind of resettled themselves a little bit, and when they got into half-time at 4-0 down, you're thinking, just don't allow this to turn into an avalanche. But in the last 10 minutes or so, the penalty decision took up quite a bit of that last 10 minutes as well. They just went to pieces in the closing stages, and Manchester United maybe have their mojo back a bit now because their strikers weren't scoring. Martial hadn't got a goal in 7 Premier League games. Cavani was struggling for goals despite some good performances, missed a good chance at the weekend. He scored a fantastic header last night, and Marcus Rashford back among the goals. And they'll be really happy that those frontline players are now scoring goals coming into a time when they're chasing Man City.
That is a great stat on Jankovic versus Gareth McCauley. I will see that stat and raise you a fantasy football stat from last night. Jan Bednarek, of course, owned by a good 11% of fantasy managers. This isn't some weird kind of under the radar player. This is a man who's been having an excellent season. He scored a couple of goals. People have got on the bandwagon. People such as Nathan Murphy actually have got on the Jan Bednarek bandwagon, and he set an FPL record last night of -7. -7 points. The own goal, the sending off, and 9 goals conceded. That is the brutal thing about fantasy football, that if you have a player sent off, he will still continue to lose all the points for the concession of those goals that he actually missed out on. The record, the previous record, as far as I'm aware, and I'm open to correction on this, was -6. Ryan Bertrand got -6 last year as a result of his red card and, of course, continuing to concede 9 goals against Leicester City. And I believe Richard Dunn also has a -6. I can't find the exact game, but I've seen this referenced last night that he's managed to rack that up. Jonathan Walters was mentioned as well, I see last night. There was a screenshot, actually, that somebody kept from his -4 a couple of seasons ago.
He was getting slandered last night on. He got absolutely slandered because everyone was claiming this is truth, that game where Walters missed a penalty and scored 2 own goals, and that was seen as the previous record. You've dug down into the detail here.
Yeah, Bertrand definitely was at least co-leader in terms of the worst fantasy football output of all time. I don't think the website was in operation for the Ipswich game, but for that 9-0 last year, Ryan Bertrand went ahead of the pack. I still want to find out where Richard Dunn managed to get his -6, though, so I'm all ears. But the most important thing this morning is that our own Nathan Murphy will concede those 7 points if Patrick Bamford isn't fit tonight. He's got a yellow flag. I see he's actually been tweeting about this. So we've got his tweet up on screen this morning. He said, time to play through the pain barrier, Patrick. So tonight, Leeds are in action, and a lot of people have him. But first up, Jan Bednarek, it's going to be something that a lot of people suffered with last night. So Southampton, you actually think that this was worse than last year for them?
Yeah, I thought they were very ragged last night, particularly in the second half. Like, as I mentioned, the one thing he would have wanted to do was not go and concede a ton more goals in the second half of that game when they had got in at half time. Maybe when you see Cavani, who was causing them plenty of problems, and Luke Shaw, who had been heavily involved in 2 of the 4 goals in the first half, including that delicious crossover to Aaron Wan-Bissaka, you're thinking maybe we can just get this resettled, get back in without taking a hammering. And then to see it go to pieces will have really hurt Ralph Hasenhüttl. As I mentioned at the outset, like, Southampton were depleted going into the game. They didn't even have a full accompaniment of subs. You got players making their first starts in the Premier League, teenagers across the bench too. It has to be hugely demoralising for them to lose in the fashion that they did at Old Trafford, while the Leicester game was one of those ones where Leicester just kind of created chances, scored them, and there was a certain amount of freakishness about it. Last night, I think Southampton will look at as just a performance they want to forget. I thought they were pretty poor. And then you got to take into context, as Ralph Hasenhüttl was saying on BT Sport after the game, they were towards the bottom of the Premier League and really struggling when they lost against Leicester, turned their season around entirely in the calendar year of 2020. But you would have thought Southampton were in a much better place than when they were a year and 4 months ago. There's no way they should be losing in the fashion they did.
I should mention Emma Carroll has Jan Bednarek starting. We had that up on screen a moment ago and I missed that. So I'm not sure is it apologies to Emma or whether or not she'll be thanking me for this, but she's got Bednarek starting in the heart of her defence there. As you can see, -7. Mo Salah needs to put in an unbelievable performance to try and arrest that. So really, my sympathies to you this morning, Emma. Right, we're moving on to have a bit of audio from last night. We're going to hear from Ralph Hasenhüttl, as you mentioned there, Will, in just a moment. But first, we're going to hear Ole Gunnar Solskjaer here.
Yes, we lost again in a horrible way. Yes, and again, same story. 1 man down after, this time it was 3 minutes or 2 or 1, I don't know. And then 90 minutes can be long in the Premier League, yes. Couldn't help them from outside. The guys had no alternatives, had no chance to react. No players on the bench, no alternatives in the defense to defend better, and yeah. And then you're a little bit helpless, but yeah. In the end, it's a little bit a different situation to the first time because we played a good season so far and we are in a position at the table where we haven't been for a long time and nothing seemed that we have such an evening here. But you see how quick it can go in the Premier League.
Yeah, they were, and it came from them. They drove it on. The players out there, Harry, Victor, David, the ones at the back, played the ball quickly. Scott played the ball quickly, so we got on into their half and last third, and then they wanted more and more and more. So, you know, when you play football, you just have to make the most of it. It might be the last game you play, and you never know. So, and they played like it was going to be, or it could have been the last game. So, very pleased with everyone.
Yeah, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, a happy man this morning, to say the least. One other piece of business we need to sort out this morning, Will, is the quarter-final draw of our World Cup of Premier League Pundits. It's something we've been running all week. We were into the last 16 stage yesterday, and we're going to open the polls from 7:45 tonight. So let's have a look at what's actually happening here in terms of the quarter-final draw. So here we go. This is on at Off the Ball AM on Twitter, by the way. So game 1 in the round of 16 easily went the way of Jamie Carragher. Damien Delaney only getting 19% of the vote. That was the first in the round of 16. Next up, we had Peter Crouch up against Gary Neville up against Alex Scott. 85% of the vote. Gary Neville easily going through. Next up, Gary Neville again up against Alex Scott. As we said there, 15% for Alex Scott. We can roll things on to the next matchup.
Are Neville and Carragher on the same side of the bracket on?
Neville and Carragher, I believe, are. We'll get those images up for you ASAP. I will just pop onto the Twitter account here. Who are you voting for here? Who are you backing to win this whole thing out?
Yeah, it depends when these two meet. Like, I think Gary Neville could win potentially, or Roy Keane. As you mentioned yesterday, Keane is going to be very popular, I reckon, with our Twitter users. So he's going to be the heavyweight to avoid all the way to the final. But Carragher against Neville is likely to split people right down the middle if they do meet. That's why I think it's interesting if they are on this kind of top side of the draw. I wouldn't want to try and guess who'd win the vote there. I think maybe Neville might just edge it, but there you go. Peter Crouch is through against Jamie Redknapp.
Yeah, there we go. 76% of the vote for Peter Crouch. He goes through. Micah Richards, hammer Jermaine Jean is 77% of the vote going Micah Richards' way. Roy Keane with an absolute beatdown of Kenny Cunningham. Almost 90% of the vote going Roy Keane's way there. Kenny Cunningham mustering up 11.2% of the vote. Graham Souness versus Kevin Doyle. 77.2% of the vote for Graham Souness there as he powers on through. One of the closest battles we had was between Shearer and Sutton. The SAS and Shearer got the job done. 60% of the vote for him. And then the final matchup was between Ian Wright and Patrice Evra, with Ian Wright getting home pretty comfortably, actually. 66.1% of the vote to Patrice Evra's 33.9% of the vote. So we will have our quarter-final ties coming up. And as you say, you're dead right, Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville are on the same side of the draw. They meet each other in the quarter-final. I should have probably seeded this a little bit better so that they wouldn't meet until the final. But anyway, Jamie Carragher against Gary Neville is the pick of the ties in the quarter-final. Peter Crouch versus Micah Richards is the next quarter-final. We've got Roy Keane against Graham Souness and Alan Shearer versus Ian Wright. So voting will be open until 9:15 this morning. At Off the Ball AM is where you go to vote. We'll be updating you on the scores as we go throughout. So Carragher versus Neville. You think Neville's going to win this, Will?
I think probably just about edges. Like, you've got a very good quarterfinal draw there because you've got Keane against Souness, who I'm sure would have loved to have seen if Keane had been a little bit younger going up against Souness on the pitch. But you know, two quite popular Sky Sports pundits up against each other there. So it also means because you've got Neville against Carragher, we're probably going to have a decent spread of broadcasters getting into the semi-finals of this competition too, because Ian Wright is really, really popular too, and he can come through his quarterfinal. Shearer's got a chance there in his as well, despite kind of narrowly coming through his round of 16 tie. But the one that really stands out is Carragher against Neville. And I wonder how much tribalism will come into this vote, with Liverpool fans voting for Carragher and United fans voting for Gary Neville. Two of the absolute favourites for the competition. One's going to be gone in the last eight.
Yeah, exciting times indeed. So we'll keep you up to speed on that throughout the morning. Phil Egan, how are you getting on?
How you doing, lads? How are you getting on?
I presume Manchester United is where we're starting this morning.
Oh, absolutely. The only place to start. And you got to feel for Southampton and Ralph Hasenhüttl. Just when you thought that the Leicester result from last season was being eroded away, they go and lose 9-0 again on Groundhog Day. And yeah, I think the game was pretty much done and dusted after 79 seconds when Alexander Jankovic was sent off for a shocking tackle on Scott McTominay, and United took full advantage. They were 4-0 up by half-time. Obviously, Jan Bednarek then was sent off 4 minutes from time. That resulted in a penalty. Bruno Fernandes put that away to make it 8-0. There was still time then for Dan James to make it 9-0. So second time United have won 9-0 in the Premier League. Obviously beat Ipswich 9-0 in 1995. Leicester, the other team to win 9-0. It's the biggest ever winning margin in Premier League history. But more importantly for United, it was a case of getting back to winning ways after losing to Sheffield United last week, drawing with Arsenal. So United back level in points at Manchester City. Now, City obviously have 2 games in hand over United, and they play against Burnley tonight. Now, there were also 2 red cards at Molineux. Wolves came from behind to beat Arsenal 2-1. It was all going rather well for Arsenal on this unbeaten run. Nicola Pepe had put them ahead just after the half-hour mark. Aye. Then David Luiz gets sent off just before half-time, and that results in a penalty that Ruben Neves puts away. And 4 minutes into the second half, João Moutinho with an absolute cracker of a goal to put Wolves 2-1 up. Bernd Leno then, rush of blood to the head, he gets sent off. So, yeah, disastrous night for Arsenal. I know Mikel Arteta said after the game he's watched that Luiz incident over and over again and still can't see where the contact is, but it resulted in a red card. And big result down at the bottom end. Sheffield United bottom of the table, and I mentioned that they beat United last week. They beat West Brom 2-1, came from behind. Billy Sharp at the goal. 10 points from safety though, and you got to feel maybe this is the season that Big Sam doesn't keep a team up in the Premier League. Never been relegated, but they're just a point ahead of Sheffield United. Crystal Palace won 2-1 away to Newcastle. obviously so much drama last night. You would imagine 5 more games this evening. There's bound to be plenty of talking points. Leaders Manchester City can restore that 3-point lead at the top if they win away to Burnley. That game kicks off at 6 o'clock. Also a 6 o'clock start for the meeting of Fulham and Leicester. Fulham have already beaten Leicester in the Premier League this season. At 7:30 then you've got Leeds against Everton at Elland Road. Then 2 games at 8:15. Champions Liverpool host Brighton, and Aston Villa then at home to West Ham. Shane Duffy was dropped for Celtic last night as they won 4-0 away to Kilmarnock. Neil Lennon's are 20 points behind leaders Rangers in the Scottish Premiership. Celtic have played a game less. Rangers are back in action tonight. They host St Johnstone. And Cork manager Rona McCarthy and Downs manager Paddy Talley both look set to challenge the 3-month bans that they were given for a breach of the ban on collective team training. A further penalty will see both counties also lose home advantage for one of their league games as well.
Good stuff, Phil. Thanks for that. It is 7:45 a.m. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Daniel Harris is standing by. We'll get to him in just a moment. Mike Carlson is coming up after 8 o'clock to look ahead to the Super Bowl. The sports pages after that, and then John Duggan's Virtual Insanity at around 8:30. Aileen Gilroy will be joining us live from Melbourne at 8:45. The tight 5 with Neil Tracy after that, looking ahead to the first weekend of the Six Nations. Our conclusion to the quarter-final stage of the World Cup of Pundits is coming up at 9:15, and then boxing issues. More reaction to that Panorama BBC documentary from 9:30 this morning. Daniel Harris, how are things?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Very well. That is how you get back to winning ways.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously went exactly as United not even as they would have planned it, better than they could possibly have hoped. That shows what you need to do to sort out your home form is have the opposition get someone sent off in 76 seconds and you're sorted.
What did Manchester United do right last night?
They played really well. It's obviously they were playing against 10 men for the entirety of the game, but at no point did you get a feeling that Southampton were going to see it out. I mean, I remember years and years ago, I think in 95, 96, United, a much better United team than this, played Leeds. And can't remember who was in there. I think it was maybe Mark Beanie, and he got sent off at early doors, so Lucas Radeby went in goal. And it took a late goal from Roy Keane for United to win the game. And during this game, you never had the slightest inkling that that was going to happen. They moved the ball really well. They stayed patient without losing their intensity, and they scored some really good goals.
It's amazing when we now look at what's coming up over the next couple of days, how one result can totally change how we view even that Manchester City against Liverpool game. And of course, with 2 games in hand, City are still going to be favourites here. But there is a real optimism, I'd imagine, amongst Manchester United fans about what Liverpool might be able to do for United on Sunday.
Yeah, I think one of the things that occurred to me last night, actually, was because the games come so quickly this season, you get real value for your form. So if you hit a vein of form, then you're going to have games and games and games and games before it runs out again. So if we see the run that United went on after their rubbish at the beginning of the season, if you look at what Arsenal have done recently, they found some good form and there was just so many games that they kept winning and it took them right up the table. You're seeing it with Liverpool at the moment. Even though United beat Liverpool in the Cup the weekend before last, you could see during that game Liverpool was starting to get it back. And then they played really well against Tottenham. And then there was another game, boom, they played really well against against West Ham. And then we've got another game coming up after that. And you've seen it with City also, who've just gone on a run. And they're playing so well. And there's just games and games and games. So I think the Liverpool-City will be a really interesting game at the weekend because you've got both sides who are starting to run into form and both sides starting to feel like themselves. So, I mean, that does work well for United. And I felt like they were kind of criticised for the draw against Arsenal, and it was understandable because they didn't play that well. They made enough chances to win. They didn't really play well enough to win, and they were playing an Arsenal team that was depleted. But because City and Liverpool are playing each other at the weekend, and City's games in particular are going to start to get difficult now, you've kind of felt that if United could win the next 2, if they could beat Southampton, and then if they can beat Everton on Saturday night, then they'll actually be in a strong position to contend for the title again. And I mean, who knows if we're actually just pretending that United can contend for the title, but they're still there right now. And as you say, if Liverpool and City is a draw and United beat Everton, then United are right in amongst it again.
The interesting thing about Saturday night, I felt, was that the reaction to maybe United's lack of ruthlessness was a tad overblown, especially from the manager's standpoint. I mean, we mentioned this yesterday, putting Anthony Martial on once Scott McTominay had to come off was a sign of a good attacking mindset from the manager. The same was evident last night, shouting for his team to go for goals late in the game. That ruthlessness from Solskjaer at the moment is starting to become more and more evident.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you can hear him shouting 10 minutes to go, 10 minutes to go, more goals. And I think that's quite important because on the one hand, I was pretty surprised Bruno Fernandes came out for the second half. I mean, you can only imagine the conversation that went on in the dressing room there. Where, yeah, you best not be taking me off, son. Where the kind of roles are almost reversed. But because he's looked tired lately. But I think what they did was he had players that needed goals, and he kept them on, or put them on to get those goals. So he put Anthony Martial on, he scored twice. The first goal in particular was really nicely taken. Bruno Fernandes got a goal, got a couple of assists, and people have been saying, well, he hasn't done that for a few games now. And he allowed players to play themselves into form, and the players that he has in reserve are good enough so that if you do put them on, you don't necessarily shut the game down in a way that sometimes the squad is good but not so good, where if when a team's looking to give players a run who haven't played very much lately or who need a goal, you sometimes feel that there's a drop off, and that didn't really happen with United. And what they did was they kept working Southampton, they kept working them, and they got their reward for that at the end because tired legs and tired minds lead to late goals, and that was always been a hallmark of United teams that win. I mean, I think there are different kinds of ruthlessness, and this was cashing in when there was a lot of goals to be had and the boost to the confidence. But it's not the same as a game like Arsenal or even a game like Sheffield United, where you don't make many chances and you have to be ruthless in taking them. And that is still a problem with this team, and that is something that they're probably going to have to solve if they're going to be really successful.
Daniel, in terms of it being a confidence boost for the strikers, though, Martial 7 games without a goal going into this one. Cavani and Rashford had also been short of goals in recent games. I'm sure going into this important spell, as you mentioned, Everton this weekend, West Ham and the Cup coming up in 10 days' time, I'm sure this is a big boost to get those strikers back scoring goals again. Yeah, for sure, because I mean, one of the reasons United are up there in the first place, one of the main reasons United are up there in the first place is because they've got a lot of goals in them. So if they're behind in a game, as we've seen a lot, then they have players on the pitch who can change the game, and also always players on the bench who can come on and change the game, even when the team themselves aren't playing that well, even when the strikers themselves aren't playing that well, because United haven't scored freely, particularly this season, particularly at home, but they found a way of doing enough. And a lot of the games have been tight, but the ability that they have, the ability that their forwards have, or almost the top level that their forwards have is high, even if the consistency level is less high. So you kind of always expect them to score. And that's what we've been seeing. And the more the confidence grows, provided it doesn't turn into overconfidence, and these players are certainly capable of that, but then it means that they'll be in a good position to find something that they need to win games. Although, as we've seen, they couldn't find it against Sheffield United, and they should have done. They couldn't find it against Arsenal. They couldn't find it against Liverpool in the league either. It's that, and that's the other ruthlessness I was talking about. That ruthlessness of in a game where you only get 2 or 3 chances of finding a way to take one. Luke Shaw got a rest for the second half last evening. I thought he was really impressive in the first half. Some good crosses coming in, provided a good overlap down the left. Now that he's had a run without injuries and getting a bit of form, I've been really impressed by Shaw over the last couple of months. I think we've been able to see this coming, but only to a certain extent. At the end of last season, in particular, after lockdown, he was forming a great partnership with Rashford on the left, and they were forming a good understanding, and he was getting forward. And the only thing really that was missing was the goals and assists, because he was a threat, and United's attack was focused on that side partly because they had problems on the right. But I am surprised, I must say, by how good he now appears to be, because, and I've said this a lot, that Luke Shaw is one of those players who looked to have got where he'd got to on talent. There didn't seem to have been a lot of thinking about it. There didn't seem to have been that much hard work either. And I know, like, there would have been a certain element of work. Like, he's not out boozing every night like a teenager or a student or whatever. He's not doing that. But in terms of living and thinking and preparing like a footballer, it didn't seem like there was very much of that going on. And Ole and the coaches have found a way of unlocking that. And physically, I mean, it's all there. Like,
he can run, he's good on the ball, he's strong, he's decent in the air, and he's fast. And what's happened, I think, with the change is there's a change in intensity. And it was interesting what Ole said last night. He said something like, we talked about Luke Shaw going forward, and we've been making him do that. We've been forcing him to do that. And it's taken a lot for them to get him to this point. But I think with Luke Shaw, it's a lot about confidence. And he hasn't had the confidence to feel that he can go forward. He probably hasn't felt like he could, because if you're not that kind of classic, proper football man, English footballer personality, which he isn't, then having the confidence to take responsibility upon yourself and to believe you can do things, when you've got a manager saying that it was your legs and his brain out there, like that kind of behaviour, and you're someone who probably needs confidence and praise, and he does very much seem like that, then it's understandable why it took him so long to get there. If you then marry that with changing managers, weird managers, a terrible career-threatening injury, all those things, and now he's in a situation where he's playing every week, there's competition for his place, the team are winning, and he's sort of someone who it felt like he eased into playing in a good team without quite being one of the reasons for why the team got good. And now the team are good, he's a really big reason as to why they're getting better. Because one of the things they didn't have was, and that all good modern teams have, is thrust from fullback. And he's now supplying that. And I mean, I know it's fewer games, but Aaron Wan-Bissaka seems to be supplying that on the other side as well. I said a couple of weeks ago that what he seemed to be adding to his game was some ball carrying. And he lacks a bit of deftness and a bit of dexterity with his feet, such that sometimes when you watch him play, it's staggering to think that he got to youth level as a winger, because he doesn't even look like under 11 level as a winger sometimes. But what he has got is the ability to carry the ball, because he's strong, he's fast, and he's hard to stop. But what we're adding now, what we're seeing from him now, is also his confidence. We're seeing him scoring a great goal last night at the back post. But aside from that, we're seeing better crosses. We're seeing more intention to hit the byline. And it seems to almost be that same kind of process, because he is another one who doesn't seem to be like that forceful, classic British football personality either. But he's being given the confidence to go out there and express himself. And just because you're not a forceful personality, and this just doesn't apply to football, just because let's call it an introvert, it doesn't mean you don't have anything to say. And I think that's what we're seeing now from both United's fullbacks, is that they've got something to say, and they're in an environment that is nurturing and supportive, and they're going out there and they're saying it. And it's really encouraging to see.
Do you stick to the starting 11 or close to it for the next couple of weeks, Daniel, as long as Manchester United are winning games? And does Paul Pogba get a look in again?
I'd expect to see Pogba back against Everton. Everton, the thing with Everton is, and also Southampton to a certain extent, Southampton are likely to run you off the pitch. And I think that's why we saw Fred and McTominay last night, because Southampton play a running game, they play a high pressing game, and also they were tired. So I think the way Ole would have thought about it was, if you played two runners in midfield, then they would be able to compete with Southampton physically, that would allow the quality to take over. And also, there was probably a chance that Southampton were going to try and play a game that they weren't quite equipped for, because they've got a lot of injuries and they've got a lot of players who played a lot of games, and physically United's players are better rested than that. It's not to say United's players aren't tired, because I know for a fact that they are, because I've heard that they are from the dressing room. But they've had, for sort of different reasons, they've played a lot of games because they played all the way through last season in games that were consequential right until the end. Then their players played internationals, and they didn't really get much of a break, in a physical or a mental break, and they had to keep going. But they've been rotated quite a lot. Like Fred and McTominay, for example, are playing maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week, but not always. Against Everton, it's a kind of different game. I don't think it will be as physical a game in terms of the pressing that will go on. And Everton will come and play. So I'm sure that Pogba will come back in at the weekend for that. And the question really is, does Pogba come back in place of Fred or McTominay, or does he come in place of probably Mason Greenwood? And how attacking are United going to try and be? Because again, when United play these kind of mid-ranking teams like Everton, not mid-ranking teams, but sort of upper middle teams like Everton, like Arsenal, they have this situation where they can either open the game up, but in recognition of the fact that the opposition have some really good players that can hurt them, or they can be slightly more conservative, but feel that they still have the better attacking players, so they're likely to win. When United played away to Everton, they played Fred, McTominay and Bruno, but that was at a point when Pogba wasn't really doing anything, so he wasn't playing very much. But at this point, I'd be very surprised to see Pogba not back in. The question is whether it's for Fred or McTominay, one of those two, or for Mason Greenwood, I think.
Daniel, do we expect a response from Everton this weekend? They were very poor against Newcastle last week, threw away a couple of points with a Pickford mistake during the midweek of last week too. What are we expecting from Everton this Saturday? Everton are a good side. So, when you prepare to play a team, you would always expect them to produce their best. That would be what you would do as a manager and a coach. Prepare for their best and hope for their worst. But, you don't know what Everton are going to turn up and do, but it seems unlikely they're going to turn up and play badly enough to lose at home to Newcastle badly in consecutive games, because their players are too good for that. They are, as you find with all teams, is during the course of the season, you will lose some games that you don't expect to lose. And because City and Liverpool have been so consistent over the last couple of years, that's almost gone out of the game and we've forgotten about it. But it always happens. It's always happened, pretty much. So it's like Liverpool lost to Burnley the other week. United lost to Sheffield United. It's just that kind of thing will always happen. And it's going to keep happening. City drew at home to West Brom. So it shouldn't be that surprising that Everton lost to Newcastle, because they're a good team, but they're not one of the best teams. So I think that we'll see something better from Everton at the weekend. Yeah, the weekend than we saw in that game.
Daniel Harris, great stuff as always. Thanks a million.
See you again. Have a good day, everyone.
Daniel Harris there on the line, reacting to Manchester United 9, Southampton 0, equaling their own record, equaling the Leicester City record, and unfortunately Southampton also equaling their own record against Leicester City, going down 9-0. So a big night in the Premier League. More to come later on as well. We've got Neil Tracy's Tied 5 as well coming up after 9 o'clock. We're going to be chatting to Aileen Gilroy, the AFLW star. But next, we're going to be looking ahead to the Super Bowl with Mike Carlson.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Saturday panel on OTB.
We're talking about these lighter footballs, you're right, but it's with the pace which they come through, and it would literally be a case where I would do sessions at heading 20, 30 balls where I would be literally feeling dizzy after it. So now to hear these type of statistics and the research that's gone into it, of course, it's a major worry.
Don't miss the panel every Saturday afternoon on OTB Sports Radio. Tune in 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Check out the Boyle Sports app today for details on which football match is getting the no-lose treatment this week. Plus, study the form with our Racing Post Spotlight before watching the action with free live streaming on all UK and Irish horse races. See the Boyle Sports app for full T's and C's. Boyle Sports. This is betting. Gamble responsibly. See gamblingcare.ie 18+.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Welcome back. It is 3 minutes past 8 on this Wednesday morning, and we are looking ahead to the Super Bowl this weekend in Tampa. Mike Carlson, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. So this is an unbelievably exciting Super Bowl, even just from the quarterback standpoint. Do you think, let's just throw this out here first of all, that this could be the best or at least most exciting quarterback matchup we've ever seen in the Super Bowl?
Oh, that covers an awful lot of ground, but it may not be the best in the way it turns out, but it's certainly the best story for a long time, and the biggest contrast that we've seen in quite a while. In that you have Tom Brady, who just by getting to the Super Bowl with a new team at the age of 43 has probably cemented his greatest of all time ranking, at least for about 3 more days. And then Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously the kind of like greatest of all time in waiting, if he can, put together a career long enough to sort of justify that position. And it's a contrast in styles too, because Brady is your traditional drop back quarterback, stay in the pocket, run everything from there. And Mahomes is, more on the scale of the mobile quarterback who can play out of the pocket, who can run and is a threat to run. And unlike or sort of like very few quarterbacks in the NFL history, the most obvious of whom is Aaron Rodgers, is able to make tremendous throws without being set to throw. He can throw off the back foot. He can throw while he's moving. He can throw with just his wrist while he's in the grasp of a defender. And that changes the whole complexion of the game in one sense, because Mahomes is one of those guys where you can do everything right in terms of defense, and he can still beat you by simply making, an amazing individual play.
The GOAT versus the GOAT in weight is an interesting one. I've seen it described as if you had Michael Jordan and LeBron James playing against one another for one game. Is that what we're talking about here? Is that how you see it?
It's a pretty good comparison in some ways, because what people would point to is LeBron being bigger, stronger, sort of like the more perfect basketball player, but Michael Jordan having that innate ability to win and make his team into winners. But this is kind of like if Michael Jordan had signed with the Washington Wizards and then taken them to the NBA championship. And then you the argument would be different. Basketball's a strange thing. LeBron can go to Miami and bring in two other all-stars to help him out. He can go to Los Angeles and they bring in Anthony Davis. They bring in other players. The analogy is not perfect, but it's a good one.
The legacy then that comes with this, and you don't want to be talking about that too early in a guy's career, but it does feel that the narrative that will be used to describe Patrick Mahomes if he wins this weekend will be he got the job done against Tom Brady, who had a good season. But if he loses this weekend, there'll probably be more of a significant mark against him in case he doesn't get another opportunity to beat Brady in a Super Bowl. That will be what the Brady GOAT believers will constantly say for the duration of Mahomes' career.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big guy on quarterback wins as a hugely meaningful statistic, and I think the idea of just getting to the Super Bowl is probably satisfaction enough. Peyton Manning gets a lot of credit, for example, for winning his second Super Bowl when he went to Denver, but he had a horrible year that year. It was Denver's defense that basically got them there and won the game. Whereas the year before, he had a very good year with Denver, but they couldn't make it to the Super Bowl. And, I think we give quarterbacks all the credit when they win games. We sometimes make them take all the blame when they lose games, but there is no sport that is more of a team sport than football. And yes, the quarterback is, with the arguable exception of the goaltender in ice hockey, the most important individual person in a team sport, just by definition. But, I think Mahomes, if he wins the game, he will have done what Brady did at the beginning of his career, which is win 2 Super Bowls in his first 3 seasons as a starter. If he doesn't, he'll be back for more. That team is, at least for a year or two, is going to be set with a lot of talent, a good coach, a good set of coaches. We will not have seen the last of Mahomes. The interesting thing to me is if Brady wins, does he retire? Does he have anything more to do except play because he loves playing or loves promoting TB12? I don't know which. But, if it were me, I would probably retire at that point. But, the word seems to be that Brady does want to keep playing for another couple of seasons.
Yeah, he's been talking this week and was asked about could he play on beyond 45. And he said, definitely, I'd consider that. It's a physical sport. Just the perspective I have on it is that you never know when the moment is, just because it's a contact sport. There's a lot of training that goes into it, and there has to be 100% commitment from myself to keep doing it. I don't think the commitment is going to be an issue.
That's absolutely true. That's the way I feel about commentating.
What's the peak age for a commentator?
I don't know, but I'm getting there. When I reach it, I'll let you know. I think if Tom Brady decides to take up place kicking like George Blanda did and played until he was 48, then we're all in trouble.
Yeah, this is remarkable, though. I know a lot of questions are thrown out, and there's a lot of exposure to the main players going into a Super Bowl. But even to be considering this idea of going beyond the age of 45 on a week like this, it kind of speaks about the mindset of Brady.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, someone made a really good point during all the talking about this week, you know, of the relationship between him and Belichick. And what you had was a guy who came in wanting to learn and willing to learn and able to learn, you know, someone who lived and breathed football and loved the detail you go into. And he was put with a coach who had basically been breaking down game film since he was 8 years old, you know, and doing it with his father. And so, you know, between the two of them, and we've seen it in documentaries about various Patriots games, you know, between the two of them, they just seem to love the whole idea of looking at game film, discovering what another team's vulnerabilities were, and then trying to take advantage of them. And I think Brady brings that with him, brought it with him to the new team, where then he was presented with a great supporting cast of offensive players, which they went out and got more for him as you know, as the season started, and a coach who himself is a really good offensive coach, with a different kind of philosophy. Offensively. And I think what you saw with Tampa to an extent was those two people, at Bruce Arians and Brady, you know, getting their acts together as the season went on until they reached a kind of accommodation where they could get a lot of the deep kind of throwing that Arians likes to do in an offense, combined with Brady's ability to read defenses to get rid of the ball quickly, in positions where the receiver can get yards after the catch, be in a good position. And I'd argue too that that's something that Patrick Mahomes does almost instinctively is the wrong word, because it would imply that he's not studying and knowing what defenses are doing, but he has the ability to make those kind of passes that get the best out of his receivers, knowing where they are going to be as opposed to where they are. And that's the real sign. I think the most important part of quarterbacking is being able to do that, as opposed to having, say, a monstrous arm that can throw the ball 60 yards on a line drive.
Mike, can we read anything going back to week 12 of the season when these two teams met? It's just over 2 months ago now at this point, but Tampa Bay found themselves in an awkward position early on in the game. Kansas runs 17-0 up. Looks like it might be a complete blowout. Then Brady and the Bucs have a really good second half. They come back and finish up within 3 points. Is there anything we can read back into that last week in November?
Not a whole lot, because I think the Bucs are playing better now than they were there. But one of the reasons I think is close, you know, that the spread, for example, reflects the idea that the game is close, is that if either of these teams go way ahead, they're both good at coming back. I mean, we saw the Chiefs last year down 24-0 in the first half and go in at halftime up 28-24 against Houston. And as you say, we saw Brady come back and bring the team back in the second half. Super Bowls can always be decided by, like any game, by one or two big turnovers that give it a lead. But I think that right now the Bucs are probably playing at their optimum, and their defense is probably better than it was. And to me, although we talk about Brady and Mahomes, which is obviously the great story here, the real battle in this game is going to be defensive coordinators, you know, and Steve Spagnuolo famously beat Brady in 2007 with the Giants with a pass rush game plan that involved shutting the middle of the pocket off to him, because Brady's first reaction to rush is always to step forward. His tackles have been taught in New England, and I think in Tampa too, push the rush the outside, and Brady comes forward in the pocket and gets himself the extra second to throw. And Todd Bowles is a really good defensive coordinator, going back to his days in Arizona with Bruce Arians, and I think he's come up with a couple of really good defensive performances that have made Brady's life easy. You know, what worries me a bit about the Bucs in this game was their second half against Green Bay, where Brady threw 3 interceptions, primarily on two on one on a iffy throw, one on a bad throw, and one under a lot of pressure where he probably just shouldn't have thrown at all. That will be something the Chiefs will have noticed, obviously. But in the first half, it was Bucs playing really well, and the Bucs defense through the whole game had Aaron Rodgers on the back foot and not knowing what to do. It'll be a little bit harder against Mahomes, but I make that Mahomes-Rodgers comparison a lot. And I think I think the fact that Kansas City has backups at both tackle spots right now, and that the strength of the rush for Tampa is obviously the two defensive ends, is something that Tampa will be able to take advantage of.
Understandably, we've spoken quite a bit about the quarterback battle, and that's going to be the narrative going into this weekend. But when it comes to the running game, how impressed have you been by Leonard Fournette in this playoff series? I think he's been really good in the 2 wins so far they've had.
Yeah, it's funny because his biggest play was the touchdown against Green Bay, probably. He runs into the line, there's a little log jam, and he spins out of it, goes outside. That's what he does really well. In Jacksonville, Fournette was always miscast as a guy who is going to take the ball up the middle and then break big plays. What he likes to do is bounce the play outside, bounce it where it's not supposed to go. And his problem in Jacksonville was he tried to do it all the time because he got frustrated with running for 2 or 3 yards up the middle. I worried as well that he started dropping passes in that game because he's basically a good receiver out of the backfield, and so is Ronald Jones, and basically so are all of the Chiefs backs. And I think both teams are going to be looking to that as an alternative to rushing. The rush from the Bucs coming from the ends means that if you can get the ball past them, if you can use a receiver to get a cornerback downfield, there's a big opening there for a back coming out of the backfield. And Tampa relies on they have 2 excellent inside linebackers in Levante David and Devin White, who are basically, White is a clone of David. They're both really fast and can cover outside. That's what they'll be depending on. The Chiefs likewise love to use swing passes, wheel routes, Texas routes, where the back goes out of the backfield and goes downfield. And I think we'll probably see quite a bit of that. And in terms of Fournette making the difference, I would not be surprised to see Tampa come out and try to run the ball early. And see if they can establish the run against Kansas City, kind of keep the middle of their line off balance a bit, stop Chris Jones and maybe Frank Clark on passing downs from coming at them so speedily. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the other opposite from Kansas City, where they actually try out a lot of things on the first 10 or, classic kind of Bill Walsh, West Coast offense kind of thing, where they go out with the plays they want to run early just to see how the defense is going to react to them. And so a mix of running and passing. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But, I'm sure there's a whole lot of bluff and double bluff going to be happening in the next 3 days. The more I think about the game, the harder it gets to call.
Mike, in terms of the uniqueness of this too, I know it's going to be a limited crowd who go in, and quite a few frontline health officials are going to be given tickets, which is lovely to see. But just the uniqueness of Tampa Bay having a home field Super Bowl. This doesn't happen. Usually the team who get announced as the venue tend to lose before they get to the final itself. The uniqueness of having home field advantage, what does that do for Tampa Bay this weekend?
Well, the funny part is it probably won't do as much as it should do. And in the end, this becomes a lot like a regular season game because the Tampa players are living at home. They're not isolated in a hotel. And because there's not the media scrum that there usually is, the Chiefs will fly in during the week instead of being there, for the whole week in a hotel. So it becomes much more like a regular season game. I don't know exactly how the ticket allocation breaks down in terms of home field fans, visiting fans. There won't be very many, I think, of either. As an absolute number, and how much noise they'll make, I don't know. So we've had the situation twice where teams have played in their own city or in their own area. The Rams played once in the Rose Bowl, and the 49ers played at Stanford. But that was a different thing, again, because of the non-COVID, the crowd was a little bit different. Super Bowl ticket allocations are always different anyway than what the stadium would be. And I noticed the NFL has said the Bucs aren't going to be able to use their cannons, the cannon that they fire when they score, so that, to make it less like a Bucs home game. And to me, the fascinating thing, the Bucs have a player called Dion Buck Cannon playing on their team, who played for Arians and Bowles in Arizona, and he must be desperately disappointed.
If there's no cannons, I simply do not want to watch it, Mike. It's a waste of everybody's time.
Might as well look for Pro Bowling Tour.
Call this for us, Mike.
Right now, it's Wednesday now. I'm still on Tampa. I was Monday when I thought about it. I'm looking at the schedule, and that starts to worry me because Tampa's had trouble with good teams up until the playoffs. But I think they're on a run. I think I'm still with Tampa.
Right. Okay. So that is going to be one hell of a storyline if Tom Brady manages to get over the line. Enjoy it, Mike. I know you're watching it from London, but hopefully it's not too negative an experience. I'm sure it'll be great. And we can watch it on BBC, I think, on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm watching it with OC and Jason and Chappers, and so that's never a negative experience.
No, that'll make up for not being there for sure. Enjoy it, Mike. Chat to you next week.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Mike Carlson there on the line looking ahead to the Super Bowl. It should be an absolute cracker. Just a reminder as well that we've got our Super Bowl preview show coming up this Friday at 12 o'clock across the OTB channels. That's at 12 o'clock midday. It's all with thanks to Now TV. Catch the Super Bowl game and preview shows this weekend with a Now TV Sky Sports Pass. We do have an update on our big story this morning, which is, of course, our World Cup of Pundits who are at the quarterfinal stage. There have been some incredible ties so far here. The first quarterfinal drawn here was between Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, the heavyweight clash. A lot of people thought this was the final, but somebody messed up with the draw and made sure that these guys were actually going to meet in the quarterfinal stage. And Gary Neville is currently winning with about 60% of the vote to Jamie Carragher's 40% of the vote, but it is still early. There's still around an hour left to get your votes in. The second quarterfinal is between Peter Crouch and Micah Richards. Micah Richards winning that one with 58% of the vote. Then the next quarterfinal is seeing an absolute hammering take place. It's like Manchester United 9, Southampton 0 all over again. Roy Keane with well over 80% of the vote there against Graham Souness. And Alan Shearer is trailing Ian Wright at the moment. Ian Wright with 56% of the vote. Right, as mentioned earlier, we have got Six Nations coming up after 9 o'clock as Neil Tracy brings us his Tide 5. Let's hear from Paul O'Connell, who was speaking at Ireland's press conference yesterday about how he ended up getting on the Andy Farrell coaching ticket.
Look, I'd be in contact with Andy. I was in the camp last year. I'd be in contact with Simon and a few of the other coaches as well. So Andy asked me after the Autumn Nations would I be interested in getting involved. I took a few weeks to think about it and decided it was the right thing for me to do. You know, I feel I can offer value. I have an awful lot to learn, certainly as a coach, but I felt, you know, I could immediately offer value to the coaching staff and to the players. And it's a great opportunity. I think international coaching it's very different. You know, you get that development opportunity, you get a chance to reflect, you get a chance to improve during the times where you're not coaching and you're not stuck in a tournament. But when you're in the middle of a tournament, it's full on. So yeah, I suppose the big reason is, you know, I felt I could offer value. I suppose my recent connection to playing is you know, you could say it's a weakness, but I think it's a bit of a strength as well. You're still clued into what a player feels and how a player learns and how hard it can be to learn at times and to change a habit. So that was it. I mean, I was excited the minute he rang me, and I think he's got a really good environment here. The players enjoy it incredibly. They're very, I suppose, a very collaborative approach, which I would have seen when I was in with them last year and whenever I speak to the players, whenever I've met them. So it was a great environment to join, and the opportunity excited me.
Yeah, Paul O'Connell there speaking in his first, I think, press conference duties as Ireland's forwards coach this week. As I say, we're going to have the Tide 5 after 9 o'clock with Neil Tracy's build up to that game. But now it is time for the sports pages. We're going to start with OTBSports.com. And we have there the main story, Daniel Kinahan and boxing. Where do we go from here? Plenty more coverage on that on last night's show. You can catch that back on the OTB Sports app, and you'll get it on all your podcast apps as well. Reaction, Manchester United 9, Hassan Hootel 9, NEIN for anybody listening this morning. The rest of OTBSports.com, if we can just get that back up for just a sec. So we've got Deitch giving his TV picks. He loves normal people. We've got English football coach sacked by Indian club for unacceptable comments, and Super Bowl preview the respectful rivalry of Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. They did an interview this week. Well, I'm not sure if you saw it, NFL.com. They got the two quarterbacks together, and I'm not sure. I think it is something they do generally in the week of Super Bowl, but certainly it was a bit more jarring this year, given the two lads were on Zoom together and having them just try and stoop to how much can I be in awe of my opponent. And I'm not sure who won, but I think probably Patrick Mahomes won, given he was genuinely a fan of Tom Brady, I'd imagine, when he was growing up.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I mean, it kind of just shows Tom Brady's legacy here, that we've had, this is going to be Super Bowl number 55, and he's been in 10 of them. And 10 of them have come during both Patrick Mahomes' playing career and also the time when he would have been probably most impressionable in terms of, you know, who was the big star when he was growing up. But one of the things we didn't get to chat to Mike about, but I was just having a quick look at the stats zone in terms of what they've achieved at the relative stages of their career. You know, Brady just had a remarkable first 3 seasons, landing 2 Super Bowls. But if you look at Brady's peak, which I think most people would probably accept was at the turn of the last decade, so around kind of 2010 to 2012, Mahomes is putting up numbers that are directly comparable with Tom Brady at that point in his first 3 seasons within the NFL. But quite remarkably, you've got, at 43 years of age, Tom Brady is putting up numbers that are similar to Patrick Mahomes, you know, despite being nearly 20 years older. So it just goes to show what kind of a level these two guys are at. And the fact that Brady has been able to maintain that level for such a long period of time. And I think the one thing is, if they do win this weekend, it adds to Brady's legacy massively. If he had just been a one franchise player and had played under Bill Belichick for his entire career, you'd be talking about the importance of your craft continually making sure that they had the right team, Belichick having the right tactics all the time, and then Brady being the general on the pitch. If he goes out there with some of his old mates like Antonio Brown and Gronk and wins this weekend, it just goes to show there's a bit more versatility to Brady than what we would have thought before. I actually thought the Bucs were going to lose their 2 games on the road in the playoffs. Somehow they've managed to come through both and win themselves an AFC championship and get to this final. It's remarkable. And we are going to listen to so much about Mahomes versus Brady. There is no needle between them whatsoever. The impression I got when I saw that kind of half and half interview that was on this week is that both guys just respect each other massively.
Yeah, that's basically the bottom line of it, and it's going to be one hell of a matchup this weekend. Let's bring you through some of the sports pages this morning as well. Then the Irish Times, as ever on a Wednesday, leading with Gordon Darcy's column. Cardiff will be a crossroads, he says, for the Ireland side, with a win opening up a route to success. Next up, we've got the Irish Examiner, who leads with a Cardiff win sets up all sorts of enticing scenarios headline. That is Donal Lenihan's column. So Donal Lenihan and Gordon Darcy really underlining how big a win could be this weekend, especially when it just comes to the mood music around the Ireland team. Board says Cork yet to make a decision on appealing McCarthy ban. Meanwhile, this is Eoin Cormacan reporting this morning that there was no confirmation at yesterday evening's Cork County Board meeting that the executive will appeal the 12-week ban that has been handed down to Ronan McCarthy for training outside the time that was allowed for inter-county teams to resume to collective training. The Daily Telegraph leads with the headline 9-0. It's as simple as that. It's Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Bruno Fernandes celebrating. United hammer 9-man Saints, they say. While golf will clamp down on big hitters, is their other front page story in their sports supplement. RNA and USGA revealed plan for restrictions on equipment. The Shambos ploy to use 48-inch driver at Masters in tatters, which is an interesting development as they try and scale back the damage that the big hitters are doing in the game of golf at the moment. The back of the Irish Daily Star is 999, Mayday for Saints, as United go on goals rampage. Great headline there. Galvin's no to Kingdom, meanwhile, writes Carl O'Kane. Paul Galvin is believed to have ruled himself out of a role in Peter Keane's Kerry setup. It was reported last week that the former Footballer of the Year was on the Kingdom's radar, but work commitments and other issues have ended the chance of that happening. Meanwhile, Outburst sees axe fall on AVB. We had a remarkable story yesterday. Olivier Ntcham has triggered Andre Villas-Boas' sacking just one day after joining Marseille. He didn't want him to be signed. The board went ahead and tried to sign him anyway, and AVB was having none of that and ended up leaving. The club tried to sack him after he had already handed in his resignation as well, which is one of the wrinkles to that story. The back page of the Irish Sun this morning, again, is 999. United ruthless as poor Ralph levels Prem record again. Louise Cannon hurts McKell, meanwhile, with a photograph of David Luiz on the back of the Sun this morning, complaining about what seemed like a fairly harsh red card last night. The back at the London Times then goes with UEFA plans for one-off ties. Knockout games in Europe may be streamlined amid chaos for Liverpool and Arsenal. It would make sense at this point for them to be reduced to one-legged affairs. Line of duty is the headline on the back of the Irish Daily Mail. This is more from Paul O'Connell, who vows to have impact on Ireland pack. And their headline on Manchester United is Red Romp, 9-0 rout for United as Saints end up with 9 men. Meanwhile, this is an interesting one from Philip Lanigan. Limerick All-Ireland winner Will O'Donoghue has questioned the proposed introduction of a 10-minute sin bin and automatic penalty in hurling for a cynical foul that denies a goal-scoring opportunity. That, of course, is a proposal from the GEA Standing Rules Committee, the Standing Committee on Playing Rules, I should say, and they're going to have to debate this next month at Congress because it is of such importance. William O'Donoghue, though, one of the first people to come out and say he's not having it. The back of the Irish Mirror goes with Cloud 9 as their headline. United make history as 8 scorers make it a miserable night for 9-man Spurs. The Guardian go with Ruthless United hit 9 in romp, and the Irish Independent say United on Cloud 9. Red Devils join City at Summit but lie second on goal difference after routing 9-man Southampton. Manager is set to challenge bans, meanwhile, writes Colm Keys on the back of the Irish Independent. 2 intercounty football managers look set to challenge their 3-month bans for misconduct. So uncertainty is how the Irish Examiner were reporting it with regards to the Cork appeal, but it looks like Downs, Paddy Talley and Cork's Ronan McCarthy are understood to be weighing heavily towards contesting the suspensions that could keep them off the sidelines and training pitches for the early rounds of the championship. The back page of the Herald finally goes with the headline Cloud 9, United equal record to stun Saints and get title drive back on track. We've also got breaking news this morning that Bournemouth manager Jason Tyndall has been sacked. So a great first week for Shane Long, to impress a new manager.
Yeah, look, not entirely surprising that Bournemouth have made a change in terms of their form has dipped off a cliff in the last kind of month or so, and they've lost 3 of their last 5 games in the championship. And the concern will be with Bournemouth that they've got a pretty heavy wage bill there, given that they kept a lot of the players around who came down with them from the Premier League. Okay, Josh King has gone to Everton this week, but they brought in Shane Long to almost directly replace him. And they've got a squad that should have been capable of contesting for automatic promotion and not in a situation where heading into the month of February, they're having to scrap to even be inside the playoffs. They should really be right up there with Swansea and Norwich currently. But when you look at it, there's a lot of good teams around the playoff spots at the moment. Brentford are coming back into form. I think Bournemouth were concerned that their slump in form might turn into a slide that can't be arrested quickly. And so therefore they've had to make a change. They stuck with Eddie Howe for so long, and now they've had a quick change of manager twice. I wonder what Shane Long is thinking. I wonder if he was aware when he was signing for them this week that a managerial change was likely to happen, because I remember chatting to Shane Keegan a few weeks ago when the Jack Byrne situation happened with Apawel Nicosia. And he admitted that when he was manager, some of the players coming in were very aware that he was on the brink at Galway United when they were in the middle of the summer transfer window. And he actually told one of the players that he was trying to sign, there's a very good chance you could be going to this club and I might not be there. So I kind of wonder if Bournemouth had made Shane Long aware that they were possibly going to make a change when he signed on deadline day.
Another Irish striker that got moved on deadline day is Troy Parrott. And here is Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent talking about his switch to League One on the Football Show.
Yeah, listen, there's no denying that it's disappointing, really disappointing. I heard great reports about how Parrott had settled in Millwall in pre-season. He apparently made a great impression, and then he got injured before the start of the season, so missed the start of the season, and then come back in and made his debut in a cup game in September and got injured in that game and then missed 2 months. So he really didn't get going there in the way that they wanted. And listen, we are biased in the sense that we are very invested in the development of a young, talented Irish player for all the reasons that you mentioned. But I mentioned this in a piece today. The hype about him was not just Irish. At Millwall, they thought they had signed. This was an absolute coup to get this guy. And their social media activity around Parrott, when he came back from injury, there was a big build-up of a picture of, look who's here today. It was Parrott's here. And I think actually what it almost did was it created a pressure around him that Millwall are actually one of the lowest scoring teams in the championship this season. So by the time Parrott came back in November, I think there was a sense of, well, listen, he's the guy who's going to cure our goal scoring problems. He was going to be brilliant, and he hasn't been around for a couple of months, so here he comes. And he came into it, and I'm not even sure if initially he was really at 100% fitness. He was started off in a central role, but they seemed to lose a bit of faith with him then when he couldn't deliver the goods, and they started to move him out into a sort of a wide area, and it sort of became clear. He didn't actually play a full 90 minutes as much as he made 90 appearances. Made 14 appearances. I think it became clear that Millwall weren't going to play him that much for the rest of the season, or if they were, it might be more on the left side. And I think his advisors and Spurs and people that are very invested in his development and still believe in him just felt, well, that's a waste of time potentially. And for all parties, let's get him down to Ipswich and hopefully he can play regularly in League One. But look, he's 19 on Thursday. Like I meant to point to Harry Kane's first loan was 5 goals in 18 games for Leyton Orient. And I'm not saying he's the next Harry Kane, but I'm just saying one bad loan doesn't make a career. But it's obviously... He'll have a certain amount of pressure on his own shoulders because he is held in that high regard.
Yeah, I think we probably need to keep that in mind, Will, just how young this guy is and how much patience is required for him. Because, like, I think that this idea of him being a Spurs product and therefore assuming that role as a starting Spurs striker once he actually peaks is probably wide of the mark a little bit here. That will take a long time to happen if it does ever happen for him. And for him to actually get back to a championship level and then maybe a lower Premier League level are the first couple of steps for him over the next couple of years.
Yeah, look, we're all guilty of hyping up Troy Parrott because for any of us who saw him play with the Spurs under-23s, or particularly the performances he put in the UEFA Youth League, those games that are played the day before Champions League fixtures, Troy Parrott looked a level above at under-19, and it was very clear that he needed to go out and get some football and to play alongside men and to get the rough and tumble of the Championship. Millwall looked like a good place for him to go. As Dan mentioned, the injury just curtailed the start for him. And then the concern I would have had was that when we got to the turn of the year and Troy Parrott was finally back fit again, he wasn't getting games in the second flight in England, but you're thinking he'll surely get a run in the FA Cup. And then you see he started in a far more withdrawn role over to the left-hand side when they played in their defeat in the FA Cup. And you just start to think, okay, it would seem that he's not fancied at the club to play through the middle. And you were hoping that he was going to get a run of games, he was going to score some goals, and that he would be in some kind of form coming into the internationals in March. Because here we are at a point where, you know, Aaron Connolly, Adam Ida, Troy Parrott, there's a lot of pressure on these guys now that Dave McGoldrick has retired to try and find someone who can play through the middle for Ireland. And Troy Parrott has had a little bit of game time so far under Stephen Kenny. He was handed his first start under Mick McCarthy in that New Zealand game last year when he was only 18. And understandably, we've got very high expectations as a result. And we were really hoping that this Millwall spell was going to be an opportunity for him to get some game time, get some goals and get some experience at this level. Because we were all balking at Jose Mourinho last year when he had a striker crisis and he wasn't playing Troy Parrott, and sometimes not even having Troy Parrott involved in his match day 23 at a time when Son and Kane were both out with long-term injuries. Now you start to think about it, maybe Troy Parrott is just not quite ready for this. And you would wonder as well how long it took him to come back from the injuries early on in the season. Maybe, and this would be the hope, he can just find the ground running when he gets to Ipswich and he can get a run of games there. But we desperately, from an Irish perspective, need these players playing because Adam Ida hasn't had a huge amount of game time because of the injury he picked up just before Christmas, and he's now coming back into playing a little bit with Norwich, but they're top of the table, so he has to fight his way to get back into the team. And then you see Aaron Connolly a little bit out of form with Brighton, and you saw the miss he had at the weekend, which looked like a guy who was a little bit short in confidence. And we just don't have Irish striking options that are actually finding the back of the net at the moment.
Who are you pinning your hopes on to be the guy who gets the goals for Ireland over the next few years?
I think Connolly has shown the most promise at international level so far. I thought he was very impressive from the left-hand side in Stephen Kenny's first few games in charge. And then, you know, the COVID situation just before the Euro playoff obviously robbed him of an opportunity to play. I think Stephen Kenny likes to play with a striker at number 9 who can show a little bit of physicality, who can hold up the ball. You know, at club football, that's generally the way his teams have played. So I think if Adam Ida is fit and playing at a decent level, Adam Ida is the player who's going to play as number 9. I'm not sure if he's the player who's going to add a huge amount of goals to the team. It's more likely that the goals are going to come off the wing with Aaron Connolly and even Robinson, who's been good at times for West Brom. But I've noticed with since Allardyce has come in, he's had a tendency not to play Robinson from the wings. There's an argument to be said that Robinson's actually better from the left coming onto his right foot, but for Ireland he's played a lot of his football staying fairly wide on the right. But he's been played through the middle quite a bit for West Brom as they've played as a counter-attacking team. But they're the players who'll probably score the goals. We don't have a traditional number 10, and this is all added to our issues in terms of the kind of quality of chances that we're creating currently. But I would imagine that Connolly, if he can get back into form, is probably still our best goal threat of the young forwards that we have coming through. And we maybe need to just throw a little bit of ice onto the expectation around Troy Parrott, at least until he's playing regular football and scoring some goals.
Yeah, wait and see how good he gets over the next couple of years. And it's still definitely a player to be excited about, Troy Parrott. But as Dan McDonald said there, he is 19, and let's just cool the jets on, waiting for him and hoping for him to be a Premier League striker in the next couple of seasons. John Duggan, good morning.
Owen and Will, how are we getting on?
Very well. I presume, again, it's Manchester United all morning, top of your agenda.
Yeah, equaling the Premier League record with a 9-0 win over Southampton last night. Look, the match was over within inside 2 minutes with Alex Jankovic being sent off for that ugly challenge on Scott McTominay. But 1995, Andy Cole, when they beat Ipswich Town 9-0, and then 16 months ago we had Leicester thrashing Southampton 9-0. Hassan Hüttel's done a good job in between those two results. But it'll be a bit of a fallout for Southampton, who've had a poor run of results recently. So the Red Devils 4-0 up by half-time. Anthony Martial scoring 2 goals in the second half. And United now 11 on points with leaders Manchester City at the top of the table. Elsewhere, David Luiz and Bernd Leno sent off the word 9 again as Arsenal were reduced to 9 players in a 2-1 defeat at Wolves. Jean Moutinho with an absolute screamer to win it, a goal to win any game really. Last night's other games, Crystal Palace winning 2-1 at Newcastle, Sheffield United 2-1 winners over West Brom in the battle of the bottom 2. Tonight, the leaders Manchester City away to Burnley. Always a tough place to go, and that's not a cliche. Burnley have been playing well, they beat Aston Villa recently there at Turf Moor. They've been hard to beat. I mean, Man United just squeezed past them, a 1-0 win recently. So 6 o'clock start for that game. Sergio Aguero still not in the running for that one. Also at that time, Fulham taking on Leicester, the team they beat earlier in the season. So Fulham and Leicester at Craven Cottage. At 7:30, Leeds United up against Everton at Elland Road. And the champions, Liverpool, facing Brighton at Anfield from 8:15. We might see Ben Davies, for example, start that one with Liverpool's injury worries at the moment. At 8:15 as well, kick off for the match involving Aston Villa and West Ham United at Villa Park. Breaking news in the last half hour, Bournemouth sacking their manager Jason Tindall following a run of 4 straight defeats in the Championship. The Republic of Ireland striker Shane Long only joining Bournemouth on loan from Southampton on Monday. In Scotland, Celtic beat Kilmarnock 4-0 last night, and the Premiership leaders and the title, they're going to win the title. Rangers are hosting St Johnstone this evening, and Ibrox start of 7:45. Get the games. Cork senior football boss Ronan McCarthy and his down counterpart Paddy Talley have been handed 3-month bans by Croke Park. They were punished for misconduct after overseeing members of their inter-county squads gathering for training sessions last month, despite the ban on such GA activity during the pandemic. Both counties have got the right to appeal. I was thinking, guys, after watching that last night, that 9-0, some of the best hammerings in sport, that didn't really strike me as a great hammering. It struck me as a result that just got away from Southampton completely, and we're in a strange situation with football at the moment. We had Liverpool losing 7-2 earlier in the season to Aston Villa. Was it 7-2 or was it 7-1?
7-2.
7-2. Yeah, I was right the first time. I was just asking people as well on the breakfast show there on News Talk as well, the most complete hammerings we've seen in sport. I don't know what you guys think, but I'm thinking Germany 7, Brazil 1. I'm thinking Kerry hammering Clare in the 1979 Football Championship 9-21 to 1-9. Lewis Hamilton's dominance in Formula 1. Steffi Graf in 1988. Whitewashed Natalia Zvereva 6-love in the French Open final. In the 1987 Rugby World Cup, New Zealand walloped every single team out there. Steve Davis against John Parrott. Tiger Woods winning the US Open by 15 shots. So it just kind of engineered in my mind thoughts around absolute complete performances. Now, United were not like that last night because it was handed on the plate to them, but there have been some great hammerings in the past.
That's a good shot. Startle Leabriggs has to be in there as well, John, and literally any Dublin performance in the Leinster Championship over the last 10 years as well. You can stick them into your sporting hammerings. It is Wednesday morning though, John, so it is time for virtual insanity. How did we get on last week, first of all?
We did well. We had a second. Tony Finau, the headline tip, was tied for second at the Farmers Insurance Open. And we also had Will Zalatoris, who was the second tip, was tied for seventh. So Tony Finau was 20-1, Will Zalatoris was 50-1. So they both got placed. So we're a bit of a profit last week, and we're pretty much not far off even money for the year so far. So we also got football bets every week. You can check them out. We had a winner last night, Cavani, to score any time at even money. So check that out every week as well on OTB Sports and the OTB app. So this week, lads, we're going to tip around the Phoenix Open. Normally a really raucous event around the SuperBowl weekend. There's also an event going on in Saudi Arabia, but if I'm watching the US Tour, as I have been the last few weeks, I'm going to continue to do so. So the Phoenix Open starts at 2:20 Irish time tomorrow. And these are the tips now for Virtual Insanity. And the headline tip is Louis Westhuizen, the South African, 50-1 for 4 each way. Might be a bit of fool's gold in chasing the South African, who's only won one PGA Tour title. That was the Open Championship, a major back in 2010. But Louis Westhuizen's so consistent. He's in the top 30 in the world. He's in good nick, finished third at the US Open last year, entering the Phoenix Open off the back of a top 30 finish at the Farmers last week. Only appearance at the Phoenix Open in 2017, he finished in third, just outside a playoff. So obviously there's a liking for Scottsdale, where they're playing this week in Louis Westhuizen. Sometimes I wonder if he's a bit passive, but the ability undoubtedly exists for Louis Westhuizen to contend, and he famously has that record of finishing second in all of the majors. He's good. That can be forgotten sometimes when you're evaluating a field like this. So I might be going out on a limb with Louis Westhuizen, but I think he might have the class to contend here at 50-1 each way. So he's the headline tip. The other three, Daniel Berger for 2 each way at 20-1. Daniel Berger, 14th in the world. That's a result of fantastic consistency. He won a Colonial last year after the COVID delay. He's got a healthy record in Phoenix. Last year, a tie for 9th, another decent showing there. He tied 7th in this event as well before, and he's had 2 top 10s in Hawaii this year so far. Daniel Berger's got a great all-round game. He's been playing very well. He's a bit under the radar, and at 20-1, he's one of the other 3 selections for 2 each way. Max Homa at 66-1 for 2 each way. Once again playing well, 18th at the Farmers Insurance Open last week. He was 6th last year in Phoenix, and this has been a tournament where players continuously come back to contend. So Phil Mickelson, Mark Hakavelkia, Hideki Matsuyama, JB Holmes, they've all won the tournament more than once. Webb Simpson, Ricky Fowler, Bubba Watson, all perennial contenders at the Phoenix Open, and Max Homa has had 2 good showings there, 6th last year and a good performance. He's trending well, Max Homa, each way at 66-1. Finally, Doc Redman, one of my favourite players, 200-1. I think he's a real star in the making for the future, a US amateur champion in the past. Finished in the top 30 in this last year. He's very good at approach shots. Now, we didn't play well last week in terms of he missed the cut, but he just didn't make too many birdies on the easier North course at Torrey Pines. But I think Doc Redman has been 3 times in the top 4 since last August. And he is a bit streaky, he comes out, plays well, they might miss a cut, but he's very young, still only 22, 23 years of age. I think Doc Redman at 200-1 each way could be somebody to reward natural talent and get in the top 8 or even better this week for Virtual Insanity. So Doc Redman at 200-1. We have Max Homa at 66-1, Daniel Berger at 20-1, and the headline tip, Louis Westhuizen each way at 50-1, otbsports.com and on the OTB app as well.
John Duggan, good stuff. It is 8:47 a.m. Let's bring you up to speed on what's happening in our World Cup of Premier League pundits. You can vote at Off the Ball AM on Twitter. Jamie Carragher trailing Gary Neville still, 59.4% of the vote going to Gary Neville at this point. It is a closer one between Peter Crouch and Micah Richards. Micah Richards leading at the moment with just over 52% of the vote in that one. The hammering continues, although it has got a tad tighter for Roy Keane versus Graham Souness. Roy Keane has 82% of the vote in that one. And then the last quarter-final, which is also a very, very close one. It's Alan Shearer against Ian Wright. Ian Wright just edging ahead on that one at the moment. 57% of the vote to Alan Shearer's 42%. Still plenty of time left to get your votes in. You can go on to at Off the Ball AM on Twitter. Right, at 8:48 a.m, we will cross to Australia because North Melbourne got off to winning ways in the new AFLW season at the weekend after beating Geelong. And one of the stars on show was Mayo's Aileen Gilroy, who I'm delighted to say is with us now. Aileen, how are you getting on?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very well. So top of the ladder after the first game, not a bad start to a season.
No, I suppose after round 1, that's where you want to be, is at the top of the leaderboard. We didn't know how it was going to go, and I suppose we got a new manager in this year, Croc. So he was just kind of we wanted to see where we were. Against Geelong last year, it was kind of a tough battle for maybe 3/4 of the game. So I suppose that was in the back of our minds as well going into round one. So we just wanted to go out there and do our best, do what we've been working on, and the results looked after itself. So we're absolutely delighted with the way we played.
Do you know that you're on song going into the game? Did you feel the training was going well and that big performance was coming?
Yeah, I suppose so. 2 weeks prior to that, we actually had played Collingwood in a practice game, and we lost that game. So I think that was kind of the kick that we needed. I suppose the girls had been doing pre-season before this, and they said like they were going well, but everyone thinks they're going well until they get to play another team. So I think we learned a lot from that. I think you learn a lot more from your defeats than you do from your wins. So we went back, we analysis to how that game went, and I definitely think we improved on the little things that went wrong that day. And for that, I'd say that's what improved us and got the result in the end.
Your own performance at the weekend was very impressive. Your stat line was 3 disposals, 11 kicks and 7 tackles. Out of those 3 numbers, which is the one that you're most happy with? Is there a specific area that you were targeting?
I suppose tackling, definitely as a defender, that's what you're there to do. You're trying to get in the tackles as much as you can. I suppose spoils in is obviously really important as well. You know, that means that your player isn't getting the ball either. So with that, it was definitely between the tackles and the spoils. So I was happy enough with those 2 stats. I suppose I've set my bar up there now, so I have to keep improving that and keep aiming for it every single week.
We often talk about the different ball skills that are required when people like you go down to Australia. How much had you to work on the tackle technique and the difference in the tackle technique?
Yeah, I suppose this is my 2nd year out here. So last year we actually didn't do a lot of tackling at the very start. So I was just coming back from ACL as well. So they were trying to keep me out of contact as much as possible just up before Christmas. So I didn't get a lot to do with tackling. But then up like into the practice games last year, I suppose if you don't start tackling right, you won't be long getting found out. So I think them practice games definitely stood to me. And then that was probably a part that I was trying to work on, because it's such a big part of the game over here. So definitely the tackling was the toughest, but I think I have definitely improved in it. But always room for improvement, so just have to keep going for it.
Do you get many opportunities to hammer home the skills of the tackle outside of training? Obviously, again, when it comes back to the ball skills, it's a bit more obvious in terms of how you can actually practice that on your own. Are you training with somebody else? Are you trying to get a few extra minutes outside of training to try and nail the art of the tackle?
Yeah, just outside training, definitely. Even if it's just after we come off from the pitch, that I can just grab one of the coaches and try and do tackling with them. Even the girls as well, they're eager to do that as well. I suppose the likes of Emma Carney there in the middle and Jazz Grayson, everything like that, like they're very, very good quality players, and they're always willing to help me as well and always giving pointers as well. So if there's any chance that I do and try and get the tackles, I do them off or when I finished up in training, and then just maybe do, if it's only an extra 10 minutes every training session on my tackling, I try and do it as much as I can. But like the coaches are always there and a helping hand whenever you want. So I suppose that's the best part of being a professional out here. Like they're always at your call. They're always like trying to get you better. So that's always, it's handy in that kind of way.
Aileen,
you mentioned the fact
Sorry, Eoin.
Sorry, go ahead, Will. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, like, we're looking in the background here. We talk about flying the Irish flag abroad. You've taken it to pretty literal levels on the show this morning with behind you. Are you living in a house with other Irish players at the moment, or are you just kind of carrying around the tricolour to keep the Aussies in check?
No, so at the minute I'm actually living with my sister and her boyfriend over here, and if you've seen the other side of the room, it's actually a Sligo flag that's flying, so it was either one or the other, and I couldn't put a Sligo flag over a Mayo flag, so we had to pick the Irish flag. Everyone's happy then.
It's interesting, Aileen, you mentioned there a few moments ago about the last couple of years that you've had, that this is year 2 for you, and I guess the first year comes off the back of that injury that you mentioned there. how, I guess, uncertain did you feel about this career taking off for you at that time, or the opportunity even presenting itself when you do your ACL and you think to yourself that this is going to be a bit of a tough injury to come back from to actually play in Ireland, let alone go over to Australia and make a name for myself down there?
Definitely, yeah. I suppose prior to me doing my knee, so I did in 2018, and that summer I'd actually seen the cross-coders advertising like going for trials if you wanted to go for it. But my knee actually wasn't 100%. It was partially tore anyways, and then we played Galway in the quarterfinal, and then it fully went. So I was kind of like, right, that's the back foot. I'm not going to go for the AFL this year. But then it was actually our list manager, Reese. He dropped me a message in, I think it was May. And he was just like on Facebook, he's like, listen, we've seen a few videos off you. We're just wondering, would you be interested in coming to Australia? Automatically, I wrote back to him and I was like, listen, I'm just after coming back from my second ACL, same knee. I don't think I'll be able for it. And if I go out there, I want to give 100%. And I'm afraid that if I, go over there, that I'm only going to be able to give you 60 or 70% after coming off my second ACL. And he was just like, well, pre-season doesn't start until October, so if we can just keep an update on your reports from Santry and see how you're going, I definitely think it's doable. So when I heard him that he had the confidence in me to be ready for October, that's when I was like, okay, sure, I have nothing to lose here. I'll just go over and see how I was going. And over here as well, even when I came over in early October, they were so careful, I was going to physios maybe twice a week, checking up on me, checking up on my results, making sure that I had my control. And as I said earlier on, they wouldn't let me into contact until early December. So I was out there a good few months before I actually got into contact. So when I came over here, I can't recommend them highly enough. They were so good to me in my recovery, and just looking after me, making sure everything's 100%. Everything over here is about stats and how you're going and stuff like that. So I wasn't allowed back into training or anything like that until I was fully right. So after that, then when I got back into contact, I knew I was 100% because they wouldn't have let me back in otherwise. So yeah, it was in the back of my mind a little bit, but at the end of the day, I think if you start pulling out of tackles and stuff like that, you're more inclined to get hurt. So I just kind of went into the deep end and learned from that.
That must give you so much confidence, Aileen, when you know that you're injured and yet they are still willing to take a chance on you. They're still urging you to come over to Australia and to sign the contract and to be a part of the team. That level of confidence shown in you must have given you great confidence as well.
Yeah, I suppose it did. I was kind of going over there with very, very little idea of the game. I didn't know really any of the results or the rules of the game. Even the ball, I've never really kicked a ball, maybe 3 times, I think, before I actually came over to Australia. So definitely that was a big challenge. But saying that again, I was just I had nothing to lose. I just went for it. If it was a case that it didn't go well for me, all I was a flight home to get home again. So it was a chance. I was leaving a full-time job, everything at that at home. I was leaving my friends, my family, my boyfriend, but again, it's only for 6 months. So if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. But I'm not one for backing down from a challenge. So I was definitely going to come out here and try to prove a point.
Aileen, was there any frustration at the tail end of last year, COVID bringing the season down in the way it did, given that North Melbourne were in such good form? It seemed on the face of it that North Melbourne against Fremantle was going to be a showdown for a final, and then everything just ended up getting wrecked by COVID-19. Was there a frustration across the club about that?
Yeah, there definitely was. It was just because we didn't know what was happening. They were saying, right, we're going to play off 2 semi-finals that try and shorten down, and there will be winners. But then the next day, then it was okay, everything is cancelled. You're all going home. And I was just okay, it was so not knowing the uncertainty of everything. So that was kind of scary at the time. But I suppose it's just kind of at that time as well, you're thinking of everyone back home, what the whole world is actually going through. And at the end of the day, it's all about your health. It's not about football, no matter how much it is. So definitely it was a scary time. When I look back on it now, it was just all a bit mad. that it was like all called off over one day. But listen, you learn from these, I suppose. It's kind of like it was out of our control. We can only control what we can control. So we couldn't do a lot about it. We just had to get up and get on with it.
And when it comes to people at home, you're probably aware that they're able to watch on TG Carher. The live game started last week. That's quite the innovation that Women's AFL is now on Irish TV.
Absolutely, it's massive, especially after coming back from the 2020 campaign there last year. To get TG Carher on it, it's brilliant to see. I suppose it's, well, like a lot of people back home probably wouldn't realise what's going on down here in Australia, and like just an eye-opener to the AFL. So it's brilliant, and just like it's amazing that they got on board and they're willing to do that. And you know, it's as well to encourage ladies in sport and just the opportunities that's out there that people can, especially young girls.
That encouragement in terms of the amount of Irish players who've gone to Australia is in a tremendous contrast to the Irish men's players who've gone previously. You know, the narrative seemed to be, Aileen, when lads got recruited at a teenage year here, it was almost like they were being stolen away from their GA clubs. But for the best part, and even like I've been reading what Mick Bowen had to say about some of his frontline Dublin players going, it seems that ladies footballers are being actively encouraged to take this 6-month opportunity. It's a massive contrast to the men who seem to be getting poached away was the way things were felt in the past.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I suppose, as you said, like we have the best of both worlds. We can come out here, we can play our 6 months, and then we're back in for championship again. Whereas the men's, they're taken away from them at a young age. You know, it's not that they're offered a 1-year contract. Normally it's maybe like a 2 or 3 year contract. So definitely I can see from that point of view that the men's, they probably do feel like they have been like taken away from their main sport, obviously Gaelic at home. But I suppose for the girls, like we have the best of both worlds. But saying that again, I'd say it's probably going to change in the next maybe year or two, that the season over here is going to get a little bit longer. So come a year or two, I think we'll end up making a decision of like, do we want to come out here or do we want to wait at home? But until that point, I'm definitely going to enjoy the two worlds.
Well, I was just going to say, would that be a difficult decision if you had to make it? Say if the women's AFL season continues to expand, you can't come back in a neat window to be back for the championship for Mayo. If it was a case of choosing between championship with Mayo and going back to Australia, how difficult a decision would that be?
Oh, that'd be very, very tough. I suppose you're coming out here and you're living the good life and everything like that, but it's just kind of, it's the love of the game at home. Like, I probably wouldn't be out here only for Gaelic. So for that, it'd be a very, very hard decision. I suppose even you see like Gaelic footballers like the Markeen going home playing for his county, and what a joy he was to watch and to be able to play Gaelic again. So like, and even it'd make a very hard decision to make. But for now, I'm happy to be able to play both. Again, I cross that hurdle or that bridge when it comes to it. If I have to make a decision, I will make a decision. You know, it mightn't happen for another 2 years, so I'll be a little bit older, so they mightn't want me then anyways. So.
It's St Kilda for you this Sunday, Aileen. Is the ambition now, are you talking about it a lot, that a title is a realistic ambition for your team?
I suppose we're just taking it game by game. I suppose with the pandemic and COVID and everything what's going on, like last year, we didn't know what was going to happen. The next thing, it was just pulled from us. So as a club, as a team, as a management, everything like that, I think we're just taking it game by game because that's all we can do. I know that the AFLW are definitely determined in getting a winners for this year. So, you know, I think it's important that we take it game by game, try and get our percentage up, try and get our scores up as high as possible. And if it's the case that it does happen, we want to be up there near the top. So hopefully we'll just keep taking it game by game and keep getting the results that we wanted.
Well, good luck this weekend, Aileen, and thanks a million for taking the call. I appreciate it.
No bother at all. Thanks a million, guys, for having me on.
Cheers. That's Aileen Gilroy there on the line, having a brilliant start to the season. 1 game down with North Melbourne, and they, as I say, are up against St Kilda this weekend. You can keep an eye on TG Cahir for their deferred coverage at the weekend, and on Monday nights as well at 8 o'clock. They've got highlights from all the weekend's AFLW action. Right, here's what's on OTB Sports Radio today. From midday, we've got Stuart Lancaster's Leaders Questions. From 1 o'clock, an OTB Gold featuring Chris Waddle. From 3 o'clock then, a career retrospective with Stephen Elliott. And then our retro panel at 4 o'clock focuses on dealing with disappointment. Annalise Murphy, Cian Ward and Sinead Kassan are the guests on that one. At 6 o'clock then, OTB Gold features Paul McGrath on the Jack Charlton era. And then as ever, from 7 o'clock this evening, Off the Ball is live. And that's live on your radios as well. A little later this morning, we're going to bring you some of last night's chat featuring Kieran Cunningham and Neale Richmond. They're chatting about the BBC Panorama investigation, boxing and the mob. But up next on OTB AM, we're talking Six Nations with Neil Tracy. Back after these.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
This is OTB AM.
Adrian, he couldn't keep these, so he's not a goalkeeper for me. He's just not good enough.
OTB AM, Ireland's only sports breakfast show, weekdays from 7:30 AM, only on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Calling all builders, joiners, plasterers and dryliners. Need advice on the right materials for the job? Consider it done. You need them on site and in your hand. Consider it done. You want access to over 10,000 products from the leading construction brands without having to start up the van. Consider it done. There's another way of doing things. E-Tag. We talk with you to solve your problem and deliver what you need directly onto site. No second guessing, no seconds wasted. Click etag.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
10 minutes left to vote in our World Cup of Premier League Pundits quarter-finals. The big tight ones at the moment are between Peter Crouch and Micah Richards, only 5% of a vote separating them, and Alan Shearer and Ian Wright. A slightly bigger difference between them, but still all to play for. Roy Keane looks like he's hammered Graham Souness and is through, and it doesn't look like Jamie Carragher is going to catch Gary Neville either. So that's how we look in our World Cup of Premier League Pundits. At Off the Ball AM is where you go, and only 10 more minutes left to vote on that. We have got the tight five next with Neil Tracy. First, though, here is Ireland coach Paul O'Connell talking about how he's going to deal with the players he already has a relationship with. He was speaking this week.
Hope not. I'm sure there will be challenges down the line when you have to have difficult conversations with people. But, you know, Andy's said over and over again, players just want you to be honest with them. And if you're wrong, hold your hand up. And that's what I intend to do. I don't intend to take a big coach-player relationship with them. You know, I intend to deliver them as much honest feedback as I can. I intend to try and improve them as players as much as I can, and I have to be myself in delivering that, and not try to be something else to them. You know, some of these guys I've known for a long time, some of these guys are good friends of mine, but I just have to be honest with them, straight up with them, positively constructive with them, and that should maintain the relationship.
Neil Tracy, very good morning.
Morning, guys. How are you doing?
All good. So the first point on the agenda of the Tide 5 this morning is surrounding Paul O'Connell and the Irish line-out. What changes, first of all, can you make as a forwards coach, and what are you expecting on that front?
Yeah, like I suppose this Tide 5 is probably more of a kind of like 5 things I'm just kind of looking forward to seeing throughout the tournament. And the first one I went for kind of just basically is the fact that Paul O'Connell is here, and you know, I'm just curious to see what changes, if any, has he been able to make over the course of basically a week or so. I imagine he was, watching a lot of tape in the weeks previous, and maybe he was in touch with a couple of the more senior and key players to run through a few ideas before they actually met up in camp. But for the most part, he's only had a week with this pack, so I'm curious to see what changes, if any, could he be making. And he spoke yesterday and he said that obviously experience is really the main thing that improves the line-out and improves players' judgment of a line-out and their ability to come into to step into a line-out and basically to be able to read the situation, to be able to look at where the defence is setting up and lining up and knowing, okay, this time okay, we might have our call set, but you know what? We can change it. Let's go up at 2 rather than 4 because I just prefer the look of what's here in front of me. And I'm just going to be interested then to see the variety, the movement of the players. How often are they directly challenged as well? Because in the year or so previous in particular, I think the lineup was probably maybe slowly becoming an issue for a couple of years. But over the course of this season, and in particular the latter stages of the season, it seemed the teams were able to read Ireland incredibly easy and pick out, like, the amount of times that Irish players went up challenged in the lineout was actually startling. And I'm just going to be curious to see how often that happens this time around, because, you know, if it's not happening, essentially it's meaning that Ireland are kind of creating a lot more space and putting a bit more doubt in the opposition's minds and just kind of slowing them down a little bit, and they're not as easy to read. Do we see a few shorter options as well? Like, personally, I'm a fan of something that crept back into the game in the last couple of years is the kind of no lift line out, where, you know, basically the teams are setting up and the hooker will just throw it into a player who's standing up. And I think if you do one or two of those, even just one of those in a game, it just creates a little bit of doubt and a little bit of variety. And it is sometimes, like, I'm well aware, it's an option that a lot of teams will go for when they're kind of struggling a little bit for confidence and winning their own balls. So on one hand, it's probably something you don't really want to be seeing, but on the other hand, it does just kind of put in a little bit of variety, and it probably keeps the opposition a little bit honest.
Is there a best situation, a best part of the pitch to be doing a no-lift line-out in, Neale?
Well, probably the closer to your own goal, the larger the risk is, basically, is the extent of it. Because I don't know, like, it is a risky option at times, but I'm not really sure if there is a perfect place in the position to be going for it. It's just something to try out once again and just kind of keep the opposition honest.
Neale, when it comes to those, just going to say, Neale, when it comes to those second row options that we have currently, are you thinking Tyg Burns' form has played him in beside James Ryan when that pack is picked later this week?
I don't know. Like, I really, really don't know on it. Personally speaking, I would say Tyg Byrne is probably the most informed player in the country, based on what we've seen since October. And, like, you know, in my own personal opinion, I would like to see him starting in the second row with James Ryan. I think maybe they might go for another option in the second row. And now look, that there's an option in the back row as well to play Tyg Byrne this week as well, because Caelan Doris is out. That means you're probably, like, more than likely you're pushing CJ Stander back to number 8. Like, the thinking coming up to this game was that we were going to see a back row of Stander at 6, Doris at 8, and Peter O'Mahony at 7. If you're keeping Peter O'Mahony at 7, all of a sudden there's an opening there at 6 where you could play Tyg Byrne and start another second row. Now, the problem with the back row is there are about 5 million different combinations you could go for, because the other thing that jumps out, which is just a natural, is put Peter O'Mahony back to 6, or put in Will Connors and or Josh van der Fleer at 7, or you could keep Peter O'Mahony at 7 and play Rhys Ruddock at 6 as well. So, like, luckily for Andy Farrell, he's not really short of options, as much of a blow as Caelan Doris is going to be. And look, that's forgetting as well Ryan Baird and Gavin Coombs, who've come in as well. I personally, though, I'd love to see Tyg Byrne give it a run in the second row, but maybe for the game against England, when I think maybe you need a little bit more physicality, I wouldn't mind seeing him being put into the back row.
That's very interesting.
As a kind of a hybrid option almost.
Yeah. And how he's utilised is going to say a lot about how they're approaching these games. Like, this brings us nicely on to the new blood here, because you've mentioned a couple of those players that you're really excited to see, Neale, and obviously the pack is where we're going to see the vast majority of these new players that you've outlined. Yeah, and, like, I know 2 of these were added yesterday, but we asked for new blood. We've got it. Like, there are 4 uncapped players in this Six Nations squad. I could be open to correction. I can't remember the last time there were that many uncapped players involved in a Six Nations squad or involved in the start of a campaign. It is more than likely we're going to see the Italy game being the debut game, like the breeding ground, barring any disastrous injuries. I think there's enough experience and enough players in form that, in all likelihood, maybe Gavin Coombs or even Ryan Baird might have to wait a little while before they're involved in making their debuts.
I think the unfortunate part is the likes of Tom O'Toole and maybe Baird as well. If it wasn't for the COVID-19 pandemic, the two of those guys would, I don't know, I'd say they'd probably be Irish internationals at this stage. They were both involved in the Six Nations squad this time last year, and it was like leading up to the Italy game, a lot of people were expecting they were going to be seeing some bit of game time. Unfortunately for them, that didn't arrive because it was postponed. And then by the time things rolled around in October and November, they were injured again and had to miss out on the squad, unfortunately, for Craig Casey. I spoke about Casey last week as well. I just love watching him. I just think he's absolutely brilliant. He's electric. He really, really lifts the pace. And I think I've seen him. I think you would have seen it with Munster, the pace he brings, particularly off the bench as well, when a game might be starting to get a bit disjointed on 60 minutes or so, is that it's reminiscent of when Albie Mathewson was coming onto the pitch for Munster a couple of years ago. Just the energy he was bringing, and just the delivery of service he has in the pass, and the speed of the pass is just absolutely outstanding. But look, we asked for new blood and we're getting it.
How much responsibility would you put on the shoulders of Paul O'Connell to ensure that some of these guys actually reach the next level, especially as we say that some of these are forwards? Like obviously the James Ryan progression into Ireland captain over the next couple of years is going to be interesting, but the likes of Ryan Baird, for example, how much can a coach take him under his wing, a coach like Paul O'Connell take him under his wing?
To be honest, I'm not really sure how much he can. Like, I think most of this kind of blood again is going to be done at provincial level. You know, it's going to be done on a week-to-week basis, where he's in there, like Ryan Baird, for example, where he's got Leo Cullen for guidance. Leo Cullen was one of the best line-out operators in Ireland over the course of the last 30 years. So, you know, I don't think he needs to be looking too far away from Leinster to be getting that guidance and to be getting that mentorship as well. Likewise with someone like Gavin Coombs, you know, he's got brilliant coaches down there in Munster as well, like Van Gran and Graham Roundtree as well. And Tom O'Toole, like, he's got Dan McFarland, who is an absolutely outstanding prop there at Ulster. So the options that they have on a week-to-week basis, I don't really necessarily think that the Irish coaches have to be kind of carrying them on that little bit more, because, you know, they're only meeting up a handful of times a year.
Neale, when it comes to O'Toole, I was asking Andy Farrell about this last week. He says he's a lot of faith in him, and that's the reason he's picked him. He feels he can actually make an impression straight away. It's not a case of just getting experience into him. There is a possibility that he gets some game time during the Six Nations, given just the profile of the way the props have been picked. You know, Kilcoyne and Furlong are coming back from injuries. There is that kind of split between tight head and loose head, which is very much on the loose head side currently. Andrew Porter is going to be expected to play across both sides. There is that chance, depending on what happens, that O'Toole could find himself getting a bit of game time during this championship.
Yeah, and I think it's a massive show of faith in Andy Farrell that he has gone for Tom O'Toole here, when you consider, as you said, the injury profile Tadhg Furlong has had. Like, you know, he hadn't played a game of rugby in 11 months by the time that Andy Farrell picked that squad. I know he got a run out for the Scarlets or against the Scarlets last weekend, so it's probably an indicator he is going to get some bit of game time again this weekend, maybe with Porter starting and Furlong off the bench. But, you know, you could have forgiven Andy Farrell, I think, given the way that Furlong's situation was going, to pick someone like John Ryan or to pick someone like Finlay Bealham, who has that little bit more experience, that he knows what he's getting and he can go back and rely on a little bit. But I think it clearly shows that he obviously rates Tom O'Toole, and I would say that's a massive confidence for the player as well at such a young age.
We do want to move on to a couple of the other teams involved in the Six Nations this year, but just finally on Ireland, Neale, what represents success for them in this year's Six Nations, in your view?
Success is probably 4 wins. So obviously one of those being France or England. An okay return is 3 wins and losing, as I think maybe a lot of people are expected to France and England. And a poor Six Nations is losing to France and England and then losing to maybe one of Scotland and Wales on top of it. So it's probably, you're looking at 3 different outcomes there.
Let's talk about France. And do this new team have enough depth in the squad? This is something we want to get stuck into here because they've got injuries at the moment, Neale.
Yeah, and this is one thing I'm really looking forward to seeing over the next few weeks as well, because, you know, last year we saw new France, you know, this young team full of hot shots, and they were absolutely outstanding, and probably for a little bit of madness really in that game against Scotland, they probably would and should have won the tournament itself. Now, they had a load of injuries in the autumn, and we did get to see a taster of that depth that they have against England in the final of the Autumn Nations Cup. Now, granted, they lost it to England, but they were absolutely outstanding in that game, and in a lot of positions were down to almost third and fourth choice players. So I think that was a nice little indication that there is a bit of depth there. I'm just looking forward to seeing a little bit more in this tournament, because they have some high-profile injuries. Virimi Vakatawa, Kamil Shat is unavailable. Thomas Ramos, who I know wasn't involved too much last year, and Roman Ntamak as well. So we did get a taste, and we saw some of those younger players like Anthony Bouthier, Matthew Jalabert as well. Were quite impressive when they got to play. But one thing they do have this year as well is Antoine Dupont, who is just the most joyous rugby player to watch in the world at the moment. I think by a mile, most people would say now, the best scrum half in the world. And just the things he can do with the ball, he just seems to pop up everywhere. It's not just kind of his work as a kind of classic scrum half. He seems to be popping up on the wing. He seems to be popping up at full back, stepping into the line, things like that. He just can do it all. And it looks as well like they're going to have, even looking at the forwards, Gregory Aldris looks like he's available again after injuries. There was kind of fears he was going to miss the start of the tournament and maybe even the Ireland game, but he seems to have been past fit. 3 man of the matches during the tournament for France as well last term.
So this is the litmus test then for the French depth over the next few weeks. We obviously know that the headline stars in this team are just going to be absolutely amazing, are already amazing, as you say. Dupont, one of the best players in the world at the moment, but it's more a test of the names that we will be less familiar with this year. When they start to get significant game time, are they able to keep up that really high performance level? Yeah,
if France can really, really impress this year, and maybe winning it might look a little bit beyond them. They're away to England this year, so you'd probably just be favouring England to win the tournament itself. But if France pick up 4 wins this campaign, like you look at that and you look at like doing it without Vakatawa, doing it without Roman Ntamak, Kamil Shat as well, that's pretty ominous. That's pretty fearsome if they can do that this season.
I wonder as well, Neale, how much of the consideration comes into it for France that they are into year 2 of a cycle, getting ready for a home World Cup too, that it might not be a bad thing for some of these guys to get blooded in during this tournament.
Oh, 100%. Now, France have never had an issue really, I suppose, with blooding players in. Their problem was that they were happy to blood in 5 players every week just because they had no idea what they were doing. Like the amount of halfback partnerships they would just churn through was hilarious, really. Even back in the years when they were when they were consistently challenging for Six Nations titles, there was always a dysfunction with them off the pitch that they could never settle on teams and particular half-back pairings. And it's probably something Galtier has had to deal with a lot in his first year, that despite the fact that things have been very settled, he has had to change the team a lot through no choice of his own, just down to the injuries and maybe suspensions along the way as well. But luckily for him, they're picking well, and they're picking players, and everyone just seems to be buying into the right ethos.
And last week, Neale, Galtier was saying England should be considered the favourites to retain their title. Eddie Jones was saying France are probably favourites in many people's eyes. How do you see it between those, if we take it that they're actually the top 2 teams in the tournament?
I would still be leaning on the side of England as favourites for the tournament, basically just down to the fact that they have home advantage when the teams are going to be meeting later on in the competition at Twickenham. That is probably just about what's kind of leaning things over on the England side for me.
Right, point number 4 is Scotland. And to quote you here, Neale, can Scotland finally live up to their potential? That's 4 finalies, Neale. This has been going on for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think maybe I just copied and pasted that in from last year's Six Nations preview and from the year previous as well. But no, look, I always think Scotland are a team, everyone wants to see them kick on and do well. Like, I remember Eddie O'Sullivan got tons of criticism in Scotland for the comments he made after Ireland beat them in the Autumn Nations Cup about how they always talk themselves up, and they always tried to put themselves up on that pedestal alongside the bigger teams, and they always let you down. And like, he got tons of abuse for it, but ultimately he was right. Like, we've been waiting the guts of a decade now. It feels like every single year we're talking about Kate Scotland. They have a handful of good individual players, and it's just about whether they can gel this together, and they can put a couple of results together. But, you know, they always seem to have an absolute howler of a game in their locker. And going back to it again this year, let's run through the really, really good players they have, because they have, you know, Finn Russell hasn't gone AWOL again this year. They've managed to keep hold of him. They allowed him to have his 2 or 3 beers in the team hotel, maybe. But like, I just think when you have Finn Russell in your team, literally anything is possible, because he is he can just do anything. I don't even know how to even kind of sum him up. He is just such an entertaining player to watch. He's such an enjoyable player to watch, and he's a player that when he is on his game, he probably puts an enormous amount of confidence in all the players around him. And then around the rest of the pitch as well, Duan van der Merwe is someone who came in on the wing for them over the course of the last year as well. Jamie Ritchie, who's just signed a massive contract extension to stay in the country. He is playing the rugby of his life. And someone I'm looking forward to seeing as well, which kind of leads maybe on towards the next point, the final point in this side 5, is I'm hoping we're going to see a little bit, and you know, I think we will see a bit of Cameron Redpath. He's the son of Brian Redpath, the former Scotland scrum half, English born, and has declared for Scotland pretty much right on the eve of the tournament, right on the eve of the Calcutta Cup as well, which is coming up on the opening weekend. So that's sure to add a little bit of extra spice into things. He's a out half come centre, but will probably be playing centre for Scotland given Finn Russell's situation. And just looks like a really, really exciting player. I think he's only around 21 years of age, but he looks absolutely brilliant anytime. I suppose the bits and highlights I've seen from him with Bath.
You think he could be a Lions bolter?
Who knows? Who knows? And as you say, that leads onto this final point that we have, where viewing everything in this Six Nations now is going to be viewed through this Lions prism. And I'm very much one of these people that, where possible, I do my best not to entertain any Lions conversation until the Six Nations in the year of the competition. Like, I get so annoyed where you're like in the middle of a Rugby World Cup, which is like almost 2 years out from the Lions, and people are going, you know, trying to pick their various Lions teams, and you're just like, what is the point in that? It is so utterly pointless, because you don't even know if this guy's going to be playing professional rugby in 2 years' time. So pretty much I will be on hold with any Lions conversation up until the new year, and we get into that Six Nations, because from there, like, the Six Nations in the year of a Lions absolutely makes or breaks people's chances. Look at Peter O'Mahony back in 2017. He was struggling to get into the Ireland team for large parts of that competition. And ultimately it was Jamie Heaslip picks up a back injury in the warm-up against England. And look, unfortunately for Heaslip, it was the back injury that ended his career. But Peter O'Mahony comes in at the last minute there, plays one of the games of his life. And that probably was the tipping point that slipped him over into the Lions team. And a couple of months later, he was captaining them in the first test. So it just shows the impact that a couple of big performances in the Six Nations can be. And we always love to try pick out the bolters. I was trying to look through things last night, and it's so tough to actually figure out what way to lean when you're talking bolters, because so much of it just comes down to like team selection on the opening weekend. Because if you have a young player in your head and in your mind, and you think they might have a really, really good chance, if you see that they're not going to be given the run, or they might only get a couple of minutes here or there, it's probably tough to put the faith in them for a Lions. But look, there are quite a lot of good young players in there in the Six Nations who, if they can get the opportunities, can absolutely throw themselves in, because there are a lot of positions where maybe the backup slots are probably wide open. I'm just going to run through some names now. These could be absolute hit or miss, I think, some of these guys. But if you look at out half, outside of Eoin Farrell and Finn Russell, there probably is another slot there up for grabs. I know George Ford will probably fancy it himself, but I think someone like Callum Sheedy with Wales could have a really, really good crack at putting his hand up if he can nail down the starting spot with Wales. Out half for Bristol, he's been absolutely fantastic. Another Bristol player as well. There's a couple in here as well. Max Malins for England. he's someone who, if he can nail down that full-back slot, I've seen him a few times playing for Saracens previously, and he's with Bristol at the moment. He looks really, really good. Other guys for England, Paolo Adogwu of Wasps. There is a bit of a hole in the English centre at the moment, and potentially he might be able to fill it. He kind of plays wing and centre for Wasps. He's got 5 tries in the Premiership this season, and he's looked really, really good, as has Jack Willis as well, another Wasps player, the flanker. A couple more for Wales to look out for. Louis Rees-Zammit, who is someone that I thought was going to have a big breakthrough year last year, but obviously the way the season probably was disjointed, it probably went against him. But he's got another good opportunity of really having a crack and making himself a Lions bolter. Another one from Wales, Thomas Williams. I know he's 26, so maybe bolter feels a little bit probably not giving him enough credit by calling him a bolter. He'd probably fancy himself as being in contention in general. For Ireland, who are the Lions bolters? Potentially Hugo Keenan, maybe Ryan Baird, but like all of this, it just constantly depends on what way the team selections go early on, because, you know, Ryan Baird might play one game in this competition against Italy. He might, on the other hand, he might play 4 or 5. We just really don't know. We need to get an indication of what way the teams go. But I am just looking forward to, over the course of the next 6-7 weeks, pretty much every game, every major incident, every mistake, every unexpected win, you're looking at things through the Lions prism.
Yeah. No, it is. And now is the time. You're right. The World Cup is way too soon to be chatting about this, but it's also a decent mechanism for us to get over our every 4 years quarterfinal pain by just distracting ourselves with the Lions. It's going to be a great weekend, Neale. It's going to be a great competition. Thanks a million for setting the tone for us this morning.
No problem, guys. Good morning.
Neil Tracy there with his tied 5. We'll bring that back again next week to react to week 1 of the Six Nations. Right, at 9:30, we do have the results from the quarterfinal stage of our World Cup of Premier League television pundits. Gary Neville has beaten Jamie Carragher. That is the headline this morning. Wasn't quite sure how that one was going to go. Personally, I'm a Jamie Carragher fan, but Gary Neville has beaten him 60% to 40%. Manchester United Twitter has done it again. 9-0 last night, 60% to 40% today. What a time to be a Manchester United fan. Micah Richards then has beaten Peter Crouch 53% to 47%. That was the closest battle we had this morning. 2 cult icons is how it was described in our Twitter account. Micah Richards coming out of that one. Roy Keane, though, with the big win of the round. He has hammered Graham Souness on an 81% to 19% vote. And Ian Wright got past Alan Shearer 58% to 42%. So we are into the semi-finals. It's going to be live tomorrow morning here on OTB AM. We've got Gary Neville versus Micah Richards in one semi-final, and then in the other semi-final, it is going to be Roy Keane versus Ian Wright. And keep an eye on our Instagram account there to see further details of that. Who have you got, Will? Who's going to be the finalists? So Neville versus Richards on one side of the draw, Keane versus Wright on the other.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if it's not the 2 former Manchester United captains who get to the final. So I think Roy Keane in his 2 rounds so far has been over 80%. So you got to make Roy Keane, I think, the favourite to win out the competition at this point. It would have been great to see Roy Keane against Micah Richards, which is the current rivalry we have on TV. But Richards having come through against Peter Crouch, I think that's a difficult semi-final to try and navigate against Gary Neville. I really thought that Neville against Carragher was going to be much closer to 50-50 than 60-40. And then you've got Ian Wright and Roy Keane, who always a good banter with each other on ITV when they did the World Cup coverage. So I fancy Keane to come through strongly against Wright. I think Neville will probably win something similar to today, 60-40 maybe, against Micah Richards. And then with the Irish bias in mind of our followers, Keane will probably beat Neville in the final.
Oof. Calling it. Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's going to be Neville against Keenan. I think Keenan's going to win it out. That was just too good a quarterfinal performance from him to ignore hammering Graham Souness this morning. Make sure to look at Off the Ball AM on Twitter. That is our special Twitter account for this show, which is where all the polls are going to be live. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Tomorrow morning, as we've mentioned, we're bringing you that semi-final of the World Cup of Premier League pundits. There's Wales. We're bringing you the preview to that game with former Lions scrum half Dwayne Peel. Television with Sue Murphy. There's going to be Premier League reaction and much, much more besides as well. Right now, though, at 9:32 a.m., we are bringing you the latest in our coverage of the BBC Panorama investigation into Daniel Kinahan's links with boxing. Here is Kieran Cunningham and T.D. Neale Richmond on boxing and the mob.
Now then, you're very welcome back. So, to the latest turn in the Daniel Kinahan boxing saga. He was on the receiving end, as we've been discussing already on the show, of the BBC Panorama treatment. Last night, it was an excellent piece by Dara McIntyre. Huge work to get all of that to air. Panorama packs a punch. Big audience, often has a global impact, not least with Sporting Stories, has been running since the 1950s. So, to discuss the potential fallout, Kieran Cunningham, Chief Sports Writer with the Irish Daily Star, and Neale Richmond, Fine Gael TD, who has been vociferous on this story over the past 12 months in particular. Kieran, this was not really for us. This was for the millions who've never heard of Kinahan or MTK.
I'd agree with that to a large point, but at the same time, there's quite a few people here who might not be that familiar with the story. Yeah. Like we can make an assumption, especially when you've been immersed in it for a few years. Like I'm kind of sick of the story, to be honest. It's quite a depressing one to spend so much time on it. But, I do talk to people and they don't know much about it, and they ask me about it. And I think their eyes would have been opened last night. Like, they know bits and pieces. They've heard about the Regency shooting. They heard about the Tyson Fury Instagram thing, but they don't know the ins and outs of it. They didn't know how long Daniel Kinahan had been involved in the sport. I don't think they realised the extent of his influence and his power in the sport. And whatever about MTK, what do we say about MTK? Because it's still unclear, no matter what they say or all the investigations or all the questions. I've sent them so many questions and they've all been ignored. How in a time of recession, when pro box has gone through a massive COVID-induced recession, everywhere else is cutting back, and they expanded rapidly in 2020, and nobody ever explains where their money comes from. And Dara McIntyre went to Bob Yelin's house, the CEO of Upright, and said they've accumulated a large pot of money. What does that mean? Where did that come from? They don't operate like a normal sports management company. And Daniel Kinahan certainly isn't a normal individual to be involved at the highest level of sport.
Neale, given the links between Kinahan and MTK, by way of investigation or otherwise, can the state compel MTK to open their books?
MTK are no longer based primarily in Ireland. They run their operations out of Dubai, where Daniel Kinahan is essentially on the run from the Irish authorities. So it really compels the world of boxing to ask MTK, look, you've said you've distanced from him. Last night's documentary probably highlighted that all those warm words after we spoke last summer were simply mistreats, for want of a better word, and he is still highly involved. He's still advising the top boxers, and there's still quite clear connections. So really it goes on the promoters, the TV companies, the advertisers, everyone else to say to MTK, look, you really need to prove that he has no involvement. We saw the reaction last year after the announcement of the Fury-Joshua fight. The sort of global media presence actually paid attention to what investigative journalists in Ireland have been talking about for years, and we saw him being dropped by the Bahraini royal family within 2 weeks. We aren't seeing that separation from MTK. It's still quite clear that he's having an influence over some of the really most promising boxers in the world, and it's up to the world of boxing to say, look, we're having no business with MTK. We're not putting on any fights until you can prove clearly that this man is no longer involved. I don't think they can do that.
Kieran, it highlights a situation we've discussed at length when it comes to boxing, that in effect there is no key regulatory body to oversee the running of the sport. There are the various bodies, the WBO, the WBC, the IBF, the WBO as well. But in effect, boxing has always been and is still most certainly vulnerable to this kind of a takeover.
Yeah. So effectively you have governing bodies that don't actually govern the sport, which is ludicrous. And, what does the British Boxing Board of Control do? It sanctions fights. Does it ever look at the people involved in these fights and think, this person or this other person is questionable? Should we go ahead with this? Because boxing is unique in how easy it is to get into the sport at the highest level. Like, if you come out of prison today and you serve 25 years for murder, you can become a boxing manager tomorrow if you've got enough money. You just have to buy your way into it. And if you spend enough money, you can buy your way into it at a very high level. And you compare that to any other sport. Like, if you want to coach kids swimming at under 10s or an under 13 rugby team or GA team or whatever, you have to be Garda vetted. And that's the case in countries all over the world. You have to be vetted by the local police force. There's often coaching courses you have to go through Sometimes they take months, sometimes they take a couple of years. But professional boxing is still lawless to a large degree. And one of the depressing things to me that hit me last night, Joe, was the reaction online to Panorama from within boxing. I didn't see any boxing figure say that was a good program. Fair play to Darragh McIntyre, fair play to Panorama for highlighting this. Instead, there was deflection, there was sneery comments about Barry McGuigan, or they were saying this is no big deal because the Mafia were involved 60 years ago. I don't know what relevance that has, by the way. People keep bringing it up. But that's the kind of world boxing that we're in. They're turning a blind eye to what's going on. And the only hope boxing has of reform is if it comes from within boxing itself. Because you do look at other sports, like even in this country, the reform themselves. When swimming was dogged by sex abuse scandals, it took people from within the sport, like Gary O'Toole and Chalky White, to stand up for the sport. Who is standing up for boxing? Like I talked to Darragh McIntyre about this program, and he talked to a hell of a lot of people within boxing who told him very similar stuff to what Barry McGuigan told him. But Barry was the only one prepared to go on air. Now, unless people stand up for the sport is in trouble.
Yes, well, people are scared to come on and people are afraid to talk about it for understandable reasons as well. That's just the truth. I mean, neither of you will take offence if I tell you weren't our first names on the list here. You know, we've been on to lots of people today to see come on and talk and where are you on this, and it's difficult. And it's interesting, Kieran. I don't know to what extent there will be a huge fallout from this programme. We have to wait and see, I suppose. I had a look at various websites today, a day on, to see if we're seeing lots of opinion pieces and, you know, a sense of hang on and stop the presses, and Tyson Fury is one of the biggest names in sport and this is what's going on. Like, you know, a glance at The Guardian, I mean, their main story today is about Channel 4 getting the cricket, and then it's Australian Open and NBA, and, you know, Kinahan's kind of halfway down at this stage, no picture with the story, very missable. BBC Sport website, it's 4 rows down. In fairness, it's sold well. There's a picture of Fury with Kinahan, but, you know, give it a day or two and it'll dissolve away. London Independent over halfway down, you know, on a par with Carlo Ancelotti, happy with his latest signing. So it's not stopped the presses either. And Neale, we do have a situation in this country. So I appreciate your point about MTK now being based in Dubai, but we do have a situation whereby 30 plus Irish fighters are with MTK, where it's not even deemed safe to have a professional fight in this country. I mean, the sport in this country is in tatters at a professional level.
I think the sport in this country is really struggling at all levels. I think we need to be frank about that. And we've seen the really nefarious influence of MTK picking boxers out of the high performance unit, going around clubs, picking up trainers. And something that we're seeing, and this is where government can play a role, and indeed where the former Minister for Sport, Brendan Griffin, engaged with his British colleagues and was brought up in the British House of Parliament, is MTK amateurs have a huge role in the UK. Now, they've been kept out of Ireland, but you can't keep them out forever until the entire sport stands up. And amateur sport is governed by the state. It is funded by the state. Amateur boxing sees that. And we need to be very clear that everyone in the sport, in any sport, will take responsibility to keep Daniel Kinahan and the likes of Daniel Kinahan out of sport. We've already seen that, okay, this was a huge documentary, it has a massive audience, but it's the next time there's a big fight promoted by MTK, be it, you know, next time Tyson Fury gets on the media and mentions him, that's where we'll see the backlash. And if you recall last summer, the initial response to the global media was that Daniel Kinahan had a colourful past. That changed, and that changed rapidly when the furore started by, as I said, investigative journalists, both sport and crime, the likes of Kieran's work they've been doing the last few years, pushed out into the global audience. The ignorance can no longer be an excuse. So the next time MTK schedule a fight and they're not clear about whether or not Daniel Kinahan has a role, the likes of your big TV companies can't say, well, we don't know anything about it. It's front page news across pretty much every Irish paper today, as it should be. But there is this body of work that Darragh McIntyre put together, an hour-long documentary. He said, Panorama, this isn't a niche show. This has been breaking stories across the world. It was breaking stories in sport.
Yeah. So here's what's going to happen there. Here's what's going to happen there. It'll be a replay of last summer, Neale, whereby there was an orchestrated effort to publicly float Kinahan with the public. There was Bob Arum, there was Sandra Vaughan, there was Tyson Fury. There was the Bahrain announcement, and very quickly the backlash came from the media and then subsequently from government, and there were Irish diplomatic efforts and they seemed to have an impact as well. And then by June 29th, Daniel Kinahan released a statement saying he was stepping away from the sport of boxing to pursue other interests. and it all went away. And that, Neale, allowed the broadcasters to say, OK, well, I mean, he's stepping away. So, you know, we're not turning down Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. That is what's going to happen here. So statement says, I'm stepping away, and then that gives the broadcasters enough of a pass. I'm not saying everybody doesn't look at it and know what's going on, but enough of a pass to pay big money for the fight. And so that's the cycle we're into now. How do we get out of that cycle?
Well, I disagree that it just simply went away. Because I remember when Eddie Hearn was on your show a couple of months after it had all died down, and he was talking about other boxers and he was quite clear. Daniel Kinahan is advising these boxers. There was a backlash, and we see the really.
But sorry, a backlash to the extent that Sky and BT and these broadcasters aren't handing over millions. Like, that's the only backlash that's going to have an impact. I mean, we can all crib about it for a day or two and, you know, do a few pieces on it. But if we're talking a real effect here, I mean, the backlash has to extend to the broadcasters, i.e. the big money, saying, we're not having this MTK fight because. So we're no closer to that.
Well, I disagree again because, as I said, last summer, like, there was emergency board meetings in both Sky and BT after the announcement. The fight hasn't been signed. Money hasn't been paid over in terms of Fury Joshua. And it's a responsibility of the likes of myself, the likes of yourselves, that every time his name crops up, every time there's an MTK fight or there's a potential for a fight, that we scream and shout as loud as possible. And indeed, the diplomatic efforts putting the Emirati government in Dubai under pressure, indeed the Saudi government, if that was where the fight was to take place. And we continue to see, parallel to this, at the same time, as Daniel Kinahan has tried his best to whitewash his reputation, his cartel is being pinned down by Garda Síochána. We've seen dozens of people arrested, charged and in jail, and we even see the homicide rate in this country over the last 3 or 4 years have dropped due to the work of Garda Síochána and the likes of John O'Driscoll to crush the gangland activities. That's why the sports side of it, we all have a responsibility, particularly as Irish politicians, commentators and people involved in sport. And what Barry McGuigan did last night was not only monumentally brave, but it was so important. And that's why this can't be just us chatting for a couple of minutes tonight. Kieran will continue to pursue this in the newspapers. But every time MTK come up, Daniel Kinahan comes up, we have that responsibility. And I do believe it will have that impact. And we can't just say, as Kieran said, that Asher boxing always has a reputation, or, well, the mafia was involved 50, 60 years ago. If we just stop talking, if we just say this doesn't have an impact, it won't have an impact.
No, agreed.
That's why
Agreed. I mean, Barry McGuigan was on the front page of the Sunday Times talking about this a few months ago. So this, you know, it's not necessarily new either. Kieran, do you want to come in on the broadcaster's point? Because, long term, we're going to have to figure out, boxing's going to have to figure this out, long term, medium term. But in the short term, 2021 into 22, that's where broadcasters can really have an impact in this story. So Neale is confident, actually, you know, this thing hasn't been signed off on yet. I'm not sure.
I think it's important to explain the difference between now and last June. It didn't end last night. That's it. This isn't the end of it, Joe.
Yeah, sure.
ABC, right? ABC in the US. Our reporter was in contact with me the last couple of weeks. They're looking into the Kinahan story. The net has closed around Kinahan to a greater extent than ever before. It's more likely that he will be brought to court at some stage now than it looked like last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. If you go back to when Daniel Kinahan signed as an advisor to KHK Sports in Bahrain, I think it was the Department of Justice here. I'm not sure. I think, as far as I remember, the Department of Justice. But they sent a batch of media articles here about the Kinahan cartel and about his connections to MTK, etc. To KHK, and they cut their ties with them. They've also been sent to the Dubai authorities. That shows the impact of media coverage. But the responsibility now lies with a few bodies. There is huge responsibility on the media now. Like I saw very few boxing journalists have anything to say this night. Boxing journalists have to find their voice. But next they're in a press conference with Eddie Hearn or Frank Warren or Tyson Fury or Carl Frampton has a fight coming up. They have to ask him about all this, and they have to press for answers, because I sent countless questions to MTK. They've ignored them all. They've never replied to a question. It's a very strange way for an international sports management company to behave. They've even blocked me on Twitter, which is what a 12-year-old would do. Like, who acts like that? It is supposedly one of the biggest powerhouses in the world of sport. It's very odd behaviour. There's also a responsibility on the governing bodies here in both amateur and professional boxing. We've heard very little from the BUI. They have to have an opinion on what's been done to the sport here. The AABA, a lot of the guys now with MTK came through their system. They were grant aided by the taxpayer for many years, and that funding they received went a long way to making them into the boxers they became. That then made them attracted to MTK. So I think AABA should talk out about this. Like, have they any opinion on it? They've never said a single word about this. And this is their sport. This is Ireland's international sport. If you look at the track record historically in terms of success. So the people involved with it have to stand up for it. Do they really believe in the sport? Do they want it to be associated with Daniel Kinahan? Do they want ever to have a big pro boxing show in Dublin again? Because it won't happen as long as he's involved in the sport.
Mm. I mean, look, it's tricky. They may feel, well, come out and say it to what end, you know?
Stand up for the sport. Like,
yeah, but the sport, the sport has to be governed properly.
There's been problems in a lot of sports over the years, and the only way it was confronted was when people who really loved the sport stood up for it.
Mm.
Barry McGuigan, whatever people think of him, stood up for his sport last night. Nobody else within the record stood up for it. But what's the point? Are they just there to make money out of it, or do they love the sport?
Yeah, no, I accept that point, but we're almost at the point now where everybody knows what the problem is. Now, can we sort the problem? So it's whose responsibility is it to sort the problem? I mean, they can absolutely come out and agree with Barry McGuigan, but where does that get us? Like in real terms, like this thing needs to be addressed.
It puts huge pressure on the broadcasters in particular.
Okay, so we're back to the broadcasters, which is interesting.
Yeah,
what's your sense? What's your sense, and what's going to happen, for instance, with Tyson Fury, MTK's golden boy, his big prize, $100 million with ESPN? If we're back to the broadcasters as a way to really tackle this, what's going to happen with the Fury-Joshua fight now?
Well, my wish is it doesn't happen, because I think it's a disaster for the sport if it happens. Because if it happens, it's justifying Daniel Kinahan's involved in the sport, because it would probably happen because of him. So if you love boxing, you don't want that fight to happen. And so the more publicity around it, the better. I hope ABC push this hard. I hope the media that are going to all the boxing press conferences in the next few weeks push it hard, because they have to put pressure on. There's boxers who've gone into MTK who wouldn't have much education. They don't have many other alternatives in life. A lot of them are married with kids, and they think this is the only way they can make a life for their families. And I have sympathy for them. I have no sympathy for promoters who have a lot of money and who have alternatives. I have no sympathy for broadcasters who've thrown money at MTK and Daniel Kinahan when they know what he's about.
Neale, I know you wrote to the UAE ambassador again about the situation very recently. Have you been in any conversations with the likes of Sky, the likes of BT?
Yeah, certainly the last time this occurred, I had a number of correspondence with both BT and Sky, their operations here in Ireland and indeed in the UK. And it was quite interesting, their tone and reply, particularly Sky, were quite cognizant, and obviously Anthony Joshua is tied more so to Sky. Yeah. They said we're quite cognizant with the issues at hand. And, I had emergency phone calls, and I know there was board meetings literally the day after the backlash in the Irish and subsequently British and global media. And Kieran's right, this isn't anything small. The activities in the US are a real game changer here. Daniel Kinahan's been hauled in front of the courts by boxing promoters over there who said, look, the money from this promoter is coming from racketeering, it's coming from drug trafficking, it's coming from all the nasty things that we know about. We're starting to see the New York Times write articles. We're starting to see Business Insider, a subscription of 1 million people, wealthy people who bankroll all sports. And it comes back to that constant pressure. And Kieran's right to put the pressure on the promoters, but also we have to put the pressures domestically. We invest a lot of money in boxing, and it's a solid investment. It's a good investment. Of all sports in Ireland, I would say it's done more to take kids off the street and away from the clutches of the likes of Daniel Kinahan. But then you can't do all the work to get them into the gyms, trained up, and then all of a sudden they're plucked out of the high-performance unit or sub-performance unit to go in and be trainers or boxers or even just sparring partners for the Kinahan empire over in the Costa del Sol. So we really need that constant spotlight being shone on the sport and all activities. I have complete faith in what the Garda Síochána are doing on the criminal side of things in terms of crushing the Kinahan cartel and the money that is financing this. But equally, we as people who are sports fans, quite simple that, leave the fact that you're both commentators, Kieran's a writer, I'm a TD. We are at the heart of this, sports fans who want to see the best for our community and our clubs at a grassroots level. Every day that Daniel Kinahan is involved in sport, in boxing, is damaging all sports at a local level, and that's why we can't dismiss it. You have to keep talking about it, or else change won't come.
Okay, Kieran, I'll give you a final word. I've sort of half challenged a few things you've said. I haven't disagreed with anything really that you've said, but just trying to tease this thing out, because I feel like we've had the same conversation at least 15 times at this stage. Final word?
I just think boxing's at a critical crossroads now. Because Panorama has such a reach, and a reach that goes way beyond the normal boxing audience and way beyond the normal sporting audience. And so a lot of people now are aware of what's happening in professional boxing and the guy who's a key player at the heart of the sport. If that's allowed to continue, I think a lot of people should give up on professional boxing. Because how can you believe in a sport that just shrugs it off and says, this is the way it is, this doesn't matter?
Okay.
So I hope there's change. I hope there's change, but there has to be willingness for change. And what I've seen publicly or heard publicly, it's quite disheartening.
Okay. Thank you both for your time. Kieran Cunningham from the Irish Daily Star and Fine Gael TD Neale Richmond. Pleasure. Thanks, gents.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette,